Hello, folks. I'm joined today by a good friend and an awesome business owner, Ben Simon. Ben owns Windsor Jewelers, a wonderful jewelry store with locations in a couple of cities. I met Ben through a mutual friend a couple of years ago, and I'm super impressed with what he and his family have built, both from a business perspective, but also the level of knowledge he has on his business is absolutely amazing. So I'm going to try and hit on both of those, talk about the business, but also I'm going to nerd out on watches a little bit because it's a real treat to be able to talk to somebody of his caliber. Ben, thanks for joining me. And before we get started, can you give folks just a brief introduction to Windsor and maybe a little bit of history?
Yeah, John. Thanks for having me. First of all, it's
Absolutely.
definitely a pleasure. So Windsor Jewelers is a two-store jewelry store company. My father started in 1986. I'm sure we'll get into that a little later as well. But we have locations in Charlotte and in Winston-Salem, both in North Carolina. And we've been around since 1986 in Winston-Salem, and we've been here in Charlotte since 2013. And we carry a variety of watch and jewelry brands as well as non-branded items across the board.
That's great, thank you. Yeah, I thought it was two locations. Do you see different clientele between the two cities or different demographics?
Yeah, we definitely do. You'd think, being only an hour and a half apart by car, you would think Winston-Salem and Charlotte are very similar, but they are very different. They have a lot of similarities, of course, but I will say, Winston has a lot of older money, older tobacco town, so a lot of history there, a little bit more university presence with Wake Forest. Charlotte is maybe a little bit more, obviously a little newer, growing a little bit more parabolically. A lot of new companies coming here and a much larger financial presence this day and age, though Winston had a lot of financial back in the day.
Absolutely. It's amazing. I believe at one point Winston-Salem and Durham were the two biggest cities in Charlotte at the turn of last century. And
if you think of Wachovia and a lot of those other companies were all based in Winston and then eventually became headquartered in Charlotte or taken over. So Charlotte's definitely growing.
Excellent. Do you think that there are, do you see differences between the two locations in terms of where they are within the city, or are they in similar districts within the city?
Yeah, that's a good question. In Winston-Salem, we're kind of a standalone entity, and we're about 4 to 5 minutes outside of downtown Winston. In Charlotte, we're in Phillips Place, which is an outdoor shopping center, but we are, a part of kind of like a townhouse next to another store, if you will. So part of a strip, and we're about 15 or 20 minutes from downtown. So in the scale of things, it's probably about the same distance if you think of Winston being a little bit smaller in general, but being standalone versus part of a center is definitely a difference.
Excellent. And how much of the differences that you see between the stores are the employees, or is there such a strong culture that there's not a big difference between would an employee in Winston-Salem feel out of place in Charlotte or vice versa?
Not necessarily. I think our company culture is pretty strong, but there are definitely differences between the two, and there's definitely differences in demand for different brands and items, even though, once again, it's only an hour and a half apart. So in terms of the employee, I think we have a strong enough culture that they would feel like, hey, I'm still at Windsor Jewelers, but they might find that their clientele is a little different, so who they're interacting with might be different.
That's really interesting. One of the things I was really proud of at Level was that I went and a couple times visited our Australian team.
Gotcha.
And I was very proud of the fact that there was Level culture there. You could identify that it was Level. They were still unique, and they had different things that they did, and different behaviors and different language, and different clientele, obviously, but you could tell that it was Level, and that's great when you have multiple locations and you're able to maintain that culture. What types of things do you think you guys have done proactively to drive your culture? Is that something your dad set out on day one?
Yeah, I would say any business is always a bit of an evolution, and we went in 2012 into 2013 from a one standalone family-owned business to a two-store business, which doesn't sound like a great leap. It's not landing on the moon or anything. However, it does completely change your corporate mentality, if you will. You know, you have to set up an inventory team for multiple locations. You have to be able to think about different demographics and everything. So
Do you warehouse somewhere or in one store and then just
we generally receive all of our inventory in Winston-Salem.
Okay.
So our inventory team is based there. It is our, even though Charlotte is a bigger market, Winston-Salem is still our HQ, our headquarters, if you will. So yeah, generally things will come into that store and be transferred to Charlotte at this point, at least. But you know, the biggest thing has just been transitioning mentally from a single entity to two entities. And I think going from 1 to 2 or 1 to 5 is all kind of the same in a way. It's just that mental shift of going from one store to many. So
absolutely, I've invested in a restaurant that started in Miami.
Gotcha.
And just when they opened their second restaurant in Miami, it changed the dynamic tremendously.
Yep.
And now they've opened their 4th location, but they moved to DC, and it's changed it even more. I hope to have their CEO on here shortly, because
that'd be awesome.
Yeah, opening up multiple locations is a game changer, and for them, you know, to get to the kind of scale that they want to, they're going to have to open up hundreds or even thousands of restaurants, and it'll be interesting to see that journey, because just going from 1 to 2 and then 2 to 3 and 3 to 4 was a big deal.
Absolutely.
So where do you make more revenue, jewelry or watches, and is it different between the two stores?
Yeah, I mean, that kind of ties right into the different demographics in different cities. It is different between the two stores. I would say, you know, we, at the end of the day, we are jewelry stores, and I think our Charlotte location has come very heavy-handed with watches, so we have more revenue in watches out of Charlotte.
Why is that? Is that because you're so good at selling watches, or
no,
is it the banks? Or is
if anything, it's not because I'm good at selling anything. No, I think when we launched in this market, we were looking to do something different, and there were a lot of pre-existing jewelry stores. And what really set us apart was bringing in some, coming in a little heavy-handed, frankly, with watch brands, the international brands that were not present in the area. And that being said, in Winston-Salem, we have a little bit healthier business, if you will, because it is a little bit more jewelry oriented. And some of that comes from just the length of time we've been there and the long, you know, history with different clients and client development. But also, I would say in Charlotte, we've had to be a little more, maybe brand heavy, if you will.
Okay, interesting. So did you open up more? You did open up more brands
right up from the get-go. Yeah,
okay.
I mean, we have a great breadth of brands in both locations. But Charlotte, we just came in with, you know, brought in 13 or 14 watch brands right off the bat. And
it's great. It's like a toy store.
Yeah, it's fun, but it's definitely you know, I would say we've probably as a jewelry store, once again, we've been very heavy on the watches, and the healthier thing would probably be to focus on jewelry a little bit more. I'll be the first to say that. But
are margins inherently better on jewelry, or is it that having so many brands you have to carry more inventory?
When you are brand heavy, you are at the whim of the brand in terms of the margin, and a lot of those brands, you know, I mean, obviously they have their cost and your retail. With jewelry, that does not mean you're magically having a huge markup in jewelry, but you have a little bit more control over you know, finding something that has a good cost structure, that type of thing. So jewelry, I would say in general, has a little bit stronger margin than watches.
Interesting, very interesting.
Yep.
So when you started with the company, were you just out of undergrad then?
So I had kind of an interesting arc, or at least I think it's interesting. It doesn't mean anyone else will think it's interesting.
I do. That's why you're here.
Yeah. Well, thank you. So my father started the company in '86. It was between multiple locations in Winston-Salem, from starting at downtown at 4th and Cherry Street. At the time, downtown Winston was having a bit of a revolution, if you will, and then it kind of, downtown Winston kind of backed off a little bit. So they moved to another shopping center, and then eventually a freestanding location. And then we eventually took over the entire freestanding location. Anyway, long story short, I was not really involved with the business growing up.
You would have been 6 or 7.
Yeah. So I literally was born the year before the company was founded. So I grew up with it in a way, but I also, I was there during the holidays or during weekends, helping clean and that type of thing, but I wasn't really heavily involved. And frankly, growing up, I wasn't determined to be involved or anything like that. It was kind of
So Dad
open-ended.
didn't push you that
He
direction.
didn't, and I really respect him for that, because I think a lot of parents would push someone into their family business and do, and he did not, which was nice. So, but the long story short, once again, is graduated from undergrad. I was actually a Mandarin Chinese major, which I am not going to speak any on the air here because it is not good at this point. But I was kind of determined to get a job in China and moved over there. But strangely enough, ended up working with Omega watch company at the 2008 Beijing Olympics.
Oh wow!
Just kind of as an intern, really not getting paid, but they just put me up at a place. So that kind of was my, in a way, I had a good connection because of our industry, and we carried Omega at the time. But it was kind of my segue back into this industry. And then post China, I moved to New York, did not have a job, and strangely enough, the gentleman I worked for over in China for Omega was sent to New York with the brand to start a boutique there. So it was kind of a weird situation. I just ended up working in the boutique under the guy I already worked for. So So yeah, flash forward, I worked for a few different companies, including Breitling in New York.
And you still weren't thinking about going to work for Dad's company?
I wasn't, but at that point, I was getting more and more into the watch world, if you will, and the question was kind of, I didn't want to just be in sales indefinitely, but do I try to move up within one of these brands, or do I potentially head back home and jump into the family business? And an opportunity at that point presented itself for us to open a location in Charlotte, and my then girlfriend, now wife at the time, we're already thinking about potentially moving back, so it was kind of just a perfect storm of things. And before we knew it, we were here in Charlotte. So, yeah.
Well, that's interesting. I did not know all of that background in working for Omega. That's
a little wordy, I know. But,
no, that's perfect. So, talk to me about Omega. You mentioned that you had Omega before at Windsor.
Yeah.
You don't now.
We don't. Yeah.
And that's one brand that's one of the brands that I love.
It's a great brand.
Did it happen because you picked up another brand that wouldn't allow you to have both, or
no?
I don't want you to get into too many.
No. I'm an open book. Sure. There's a lot of things that happened in the watch industry pre-recession, and it wasn't all involving the recession, but almost it kind of felt like times like these where everyone's very confident economically. A lot of the brands are very confident in themselves, not just their partners, but themselves as a strong brand. And in the mid to late 2000s, prior to the recession, a lot of brands were pushing to do their own boutiques and just kind of leave everyone else behind. And Omega was, at that time, opening boutiques all over the place. They opened 30 or 40 boutiques in a matter of years, which now I think are probably 6 or 7 boutiques remaining. I could be wrong on these numbers, so don't quote me.
Directionally.
Anyway, at the time they wanted about 3 times the case space within our store.
Okay.
We didn't have it to give. It would probably result in us giving up a few other brands. And due to kind of a mutual misunderstanding, we parted ways. But we did have it in our Winston-Salem location for about 25 years, and it's a great brand. It's one of the most storied brands out there, and I'd love to have them back, but it's also one of those brands that's very focused on particular watches, and I do wonder about the entire spectrum of the health of the brand.
That's very interesting. Yeah, I have a Dark Side of the Moon, and cool it's funny. It's one of my favorites, but I almost never wear it because of the all black. It's just not all that versatile, but I do like the brand. And I always wonder, because I feel like when you look at luxury brands, like the first two that most people have heard of are Rolex and Omega. Yeah. Is there much rivalry between those two, or do they care?
I think there's rivalry in any brands within any industry. I think both brands would say, no, there's not rivalry, but then behind closed doors there probably is. But
it's not Duke and UNC.
Yeah, it's a little different than that type of, at the end of the day, they're all Swiss companies vying to keep Swiss exports up and to make sure the Swiss economy is strong. So they're all kind of in it together, even if there does seem to be this competition. So it's more about how you brand yourself,
Yeah.
and what speaks to you.
Absolutely. And I definitely want to speak to that a little
for
bit.
sure.
So, and I know you don't think you're a great sales guy, or you're being a little bit a little bit humble there, but you're one of the best salespeople I know in any industry. Can you give me a little bit of your thoughts on what makes a good salesperson?
I think it does depend on the industry.
Mm-hmm.
I think it depends on what you're selling, but I think most importantly in today's sales world, it's just about creating an experience.
Mm-hmm.
I think, especially a younger consumer, they don't want to just cut and dry, go buy something. If they're not clicking a button online, then they're looking for an experience. Even if they are clicking a button online to buy something, they still secretly want an experience. So I think the most important thing, I mean, everyone sells differently, so you can't just say, this is how you're a good salesperson and try to fit someone into that slot. I know we would never try to do that with our associates. It's all about creating an experience and a relationship, and I think that's what it comes down to.
I agree, and I think that applies in any industry. And I think too, the days of the aggressive, pushy salesperson coming in and dominating a conversation are over. Nobody wants to buy from that anymore.
I agree.
And well, what's more important to you as a business person, getting a new customer or getting an existing customer to make another purchase?
This is a tough question. I think there's a fine line between what's more beneficial. It's hard to continue to expand a business without finding and developing new clientele. But I think there is especially in our industry, we're such an old school industry. When you put aside the watch brands and you look at jewelry as a whole, it's one of the oldest, longest running industries ever. Even if you call it back in the day, I mean, it was just more of a craft.
Absolutely. Well, many trade routes were developed between the East and the West for jewelry and spices, right? I mean,
so if you think back to that, it was more about long-term investment and clienteling, developing relationships once again. And I extremely value any relationship we can build, and that's definitely the strongest foundation for us. But I think we're continually working to find new clients and develop new ones as well, because you got to have that.
You got to have both.
There's no way around that. So.
How did you move your way up the ladder at Windsor? I mean, what was the career progression there? Was it come in on day one and run Charlotte, or was it?
Yeah, I mean, I probably sound pretty snobby, but it wasn't like I worked in the mailroom and worked my way up. I mean, I helped out when I was a lot younger and cleaning and that type of thing. But really, if I looked back to me being like 13 and being there during winter break at school,
you were getting your education.
I was getting my education, but probably like the Windsor employees at the time thought I was, the annoying owner's son running around causing trouble. So. And that probably hasn't changed too much, but no. But when I came back in, it was kind of initially kind of as business partner. I didn't really know exactly. I mean, that literally was my title, business partner. I didn't know what direction we were going to go in, or I was going to go in, and it has developed into vice president under my father, the president. But I did come in from day one, essentially running Charlotte.
Okay.
So
is that kind of how it runs right now? He runs Winston-Salem.
He runs the company, period, but he has been, and I'm sure we'll get into family relationships, but he very much has given me space, even though he's over both locations.
Okay.
He lets me kind of, I say, make the final decisions for Charlotte and run the day-to-day. However, I mean, he's very much present there, once or twice a week, if not more, so.
Well, you it's like you knew my next question.
Yeah.
What are the challenges and what are the benefits of working with family members?
Yeah, I mean, family business is interesting, and we have a great relationship in that we are not, as much as we're in each other's business all the time, because it's literally our business, we're not heavily involved in each other's personal lives to the point where it just it infects the business or anything like that. So I mean, some of the challenges would definitely be, you may not say, I mean, everyone knows this probably, but you may not say things to your family members that you would say to another business associate in both a good and a bad way. And sometimes, it can be, sometimes something needs to be said, but it's too personal, so you don't want to affect family. Other times you say it because it is family, and you wouldn't normally say that to someone. But that's also a strength in a family business, because you can be closer in that way and really get down to it. So.
Very interesting. Do you have any other employees who are family members?
Yeah. So our head of accounting, I mean, our chief financial officer is my mother, and she has been essentially since day one with Windsor.
Interesting. What about outside of the Simon family? Are there any siblings or?
There have been multiple siblings in between the locations that are family and have worked long term at Windsor.
Oh, that's great.
Specifically in Winston-Salem, because we've just had some employees for quite an extensive bit of time up there. But in general, it's most of the staff is not family. So,
okay, got it.
Though we like to think we're family, I don't know if they feel that way, but.
So I want to shift gears a little bit. How do you go about marketing the business? Do you have a marketing team, or is that something you and your father kind of tag team on?
Yeah, I have to give my father credit. If he wasn't in jewelry, I swear he would be in he would have his own billboard company or digital marketing company at this point or something. He's very adept and savvy when it comes to marketing, and so. It has kind of evolved over the years. We used to have an in-house marketing associate that was also a sales associate that kind of handled our co-op from our brands and things like that. But now it is fully a third-party ad agency that we work with. But it really is my father and myself and essentially and our GM and our ad agency who really do push for most of the decision making.
And within marketing, there's a lot of different aspects of marketing that are all difficult, because I'm not a marketing guru myself. But within marketing, it seems like a lot of people either think about how do I drive a sales funnel or how do I build the brand, and there's other things around it. But which of those two is more important to you guys at this stage?
I think you have to strategically place things that are going to do a little bit of both. I will say we're so brand heavy that sometimes we don't have as much of a choice as we would like. So it's more, let's just use billboards as an example. We're rarely going to place a billboard that is just a Windsor branded billboard about our company. It is generally going to be a branded item that we're tagged in, that we're co-oping with the brand or getting some advertising support. And so there are other means of just branding the company versus branding along with an existing luxury brand.
Absolutely, and I want to get into that a little bit.
Sure.
How do you balance the needs of your own brand and those of the brands that you sell? Because you have some of the most iconic brands, not just in watches, but in the world. I think Rolex is considered one of the top 3 brands.
Yeah, if you're of any industry, I think it's Rolex. I'll probably misquote all this. Rolex, Disney, Nike, a few others. So Starbucks, I'm sure, is up there. Thanks to Game of Thrones recently, especially.
That was great product placement.
Yeah, I heard they picked up an extra significant amount of ad from that advertising. But with some of our brands, you have to walk the line of we have to advertise within their means and how they want their brand to be presented. So the key for us is how do we do that, but also place things according to how we find it's most beneficial to us. And it can really it can become quite tumultuous at times, because the brands, we might have an idea that is very well suited to our market, and an international brand may not necessarily see it that way for the scope of their brand, even though we might understand the market a little better in terms of locality. But it doesn't fit their regulations for how something should be placed. I mean, even Charlotte and Winston are both very billboard heavy markets, for example. Not always the top way to advertise today, but it is still significant in our market versus a lot of other markets. And certain brands, not to throw, just as an example, Panerai would not allow any outdoor advertising for years and years and years. So to us, we were kind of missing the boat there with that brand, whereas we thought it'd be beneficial, and it's just simply not in their wheelhouse for how they advertise. So
that's interesting.
So things like that, you have to kind of balance back and forth.
Now, do they have local brand? Do most brands have local brand ambassadors that work with you to try to bridge the gap between these international Swiss companies?
Yeah, so, I mean, most will have a U.S. distributor, but usually it is a company-owned distributor, so it's usually not a third party. It's usually part of their vertical network. But I think just legally they have to have a distributor to bring export into the country. So it's usually the same company, but it's U.S. based. And then sometimes they have regional distribution as well.
Because I could have sworn at one of your Tudor events that there was a brand ambassador there, but he's not.
Oh, yeah,
I guess he's probably for all of the U.S.
So there are brand representatives for certain regions or certain states, or sometimes there's no rhyme or reason to it. They just have certain accounts. But I mean, absolutely, most of our brands, we have like a dedicated person that services our account. Okay. They're not necessarily the person who services the advertising side of the account, though.
Well, so you talked about this a little bit, but I'd like to drill into it if you don't mind. I mentioned that you carry Rolex, which is obviously an iconic brand. You mentioned Panerai, another, for folks that aren't into watches, that's one that's done an excellent job, and from my perspective. And then Patek, which is maybe not as well known as Rolex, but certainly is a brand with some real gravity behind it.
Oh, yeah.
Can you maybe just talk a little bit about the differences in branding approach that you see between these great brands and do they evolve over time? I imagine it's probably like cars, when you look at the way a Mercedes does its branding, it's built for the long haul, much more of a luxury brand, whereas maybe a Honda, the marketing campaigns might change. Do you see that type of dynamic playing out between the brands?
Definitely do, and it's a really good analogy between the watch industry and the car industry, and we use the analogy a lot. I mean, to go back to Rolex has done just the most significant and phenomenal job of advertising itself as a brand over the past, from the 40s on, if not before. I'm not the best with historical dates, but throughout the 1900s, throughout the 20th century, Rolex just not only was already significant, but they made themselves a household name, so that name is, I don't want to say it's beyond the product, because the product speaks for itself, and the timepieces are incredible, but Rolex has significance outside of that. I mean, it is literally like
they have cultural significance. Rappers talk about the Rolex presidents, and I don't think a president has worn the Rolex presidents in probably 5 generations.
Not at least not very publicly. But rappers are talking about other brands too. There was a funny article about. I forget which rapper it was, but he mentioned Patek Philippe and kind of had the number a little backwards on the reference, but it was still the fact that it was present in his song just shows that some of these other brands are becoming cultural icons as well, outside of their hot luxury icon status. So it kind of depends, but going back to the car analogy, I mean, you're absolutely right. Some brands are kind of placing themselves where their advertising and their status is going to, it's not going to change that level for another 30, 40, potentially indefinitely years. They have a very generational sort of advertising campaign, whereas others, you see the entire campaign change year after year after year, and they do different celebrities and this type. And that's not a bad approach either, but it's a more dynamic approach that maybe doesn't place them as high on the food chain, if you will, only because they don't have that generational value.
It is interesting when you see some brands that are kind of doing things that are where you can see they're trying to move the needle. I remember TAG releasing, I believe, a perpetual calendar and I always pronounce it incorrect.
Tourbillon.
Yeah. And which is amazing because great brand, obviously, but they're definitely more on what you would think of. Here's the celebrity of the year promoting this, and it's watches that are probably purchased more frequently. And here you have 2 fantastic movements that you typically associate with watches that are, 5 times more expensive, 10 times more expensive.
Yeah, and you nailed kind of one that was in my head as well. But TAG brought out a tourbillon that was priced at about 1/4 or 1/5 of most tourbillons, or the next least expensive tourbillons on the market. And they did it in a way that was kind of a very innovative, but also a little more fashion forward versus a classical watch. It was a bigger skeletonized piece, which is really cool, but definitely a departure from classical tourbillon dress watch. And
the gentleman that was running TAG at the time, he's done this kind of innovation at multiple companies. I believe he designed the Big Bang,
Jean-Claude Biver,
the Nautilus.
Not the Nautilus, but he's the the design is kind of influenced by that, I would say. But yes, he was over Hublot and had a lot to do with Hublot's rise, in different ways, and then has been very energetic with both Tag Heuer and Zenith, and then he is essentially stepping back from all of that right now.
Okay, I've seen a couple interviews. You can just tell
he's a
when
very
somebody's
energetic guy,
brilliant and just sees things differently.
So that's I mean, he a lot of energy, but also kind of open to change, which sometimes watch brands aren't open to change, and therefore there's some detriment there. But also maybe sometimes the energy goes so far that they don't stay true to their roots. So I think it's all about finding that middle ground.
That's so true in any industry, is balancing those two. So let's go back to the billboards. How do you go about deciding which one to place in each location? Do you run the same ones on multiple billboards throughout the city? Like, what does that dynamic look like?
Yeah, I mean, you want it to be a little bit of to use the word that's always used with Apple, like a little bit of an ecosystem, where someone sees a billboard and they're like, okay, that's Windsor. At the same time, to go back to the branded, aspect of it, we are at the whim of, we can't just take a Rolex watch and create our own billboard with it. We have to use their creative. So whether you see our billboard or another company's billboard, if they happen to have the same brand, it might look similar. But in terms of choosing billboards, I mean, we look at everything from, is it right hand read and you're going, it's on your right, or is it left hand and you're looking across lanes, or how many eyes is it hitting based on the specs they have? I mean, we get a whole breadth of specifications for each board, but also we look at, is it heading towards our store? Is it a certain distance from our store? Is it something that, given Charlotte's traffic pattern, is it something, is someone going to be physically stopped there for 5 minutes staring at it? Is that a good thing? Are they going to see us and relate that mentally to being stopped in traffic? Generally, that's a good thing.
And do the brands give you some of this data as well, or is that all things that you
The brands want premier placement generally, but we usually have the authority to place them. But it is, at Rolex, for example, you don't want to have one Rolex board, and if another authorized dealer happened to be in the city, you wouldn't want to be the next board down. So they're gonna look at that as well on their end. But in general, we have most of the control, if you will.
That's great. And building on that theme, I recall seeing a Rolex Pepsi GMT up fairly recently.
Oh yeah.
I take it, first of all, you don't have any in stock or know when you're getting any in. Is that correct?
We do not currently have one, and I have to be very PC when we discuss the quantities that Rolex allocates to us. But
needless to say, it's a very in-demand watch.
Very in-demand watch, a watch that gets a lot of attention, along with a lot of other watches out there. But yes, it's difficult to keep up with the demand for the watch, to say very lightly.
So talk a bit about the thought process for putting up a watch that you can't sell for a while.
Yeah. I mean, I could throw in the old car analogy there. A lot of times you see, I think of, you might see a Lexus commercial and they don't show you the kind of, I don't want to say run-of-the-mill Lexus, but they start with the sporty prototype version of it that, is tires squealing and the glass is sitting behind the exhaust pipe, gets exploded, and, that's marketing 101, is they start with something very exciting, and that's not exactly what we're trying to do by putting up the watch that you can't just, okay, I'm driving home from work, I see this watch, I give the store a call, but you don't have it.
It's a $13,000 watch, and people aren't going to make that kind of decision that way anyways, I presume.
Generally not, but to get to the meat of the question, I guess, we put up what we think is going to get the most attention. I mean, we're a business at the end of the day. At the same time, we don't want to drive people crazy. There are certain watches that are not options to put up. Like, for example, to bring up something I'm probably going to regret, but the stainless steel Daytona with ceramic bezel is not an option by the brand.
They don't put that up?
Right. So generally speaking, you would not see that on a billboard.
Is that because it's just so well known?
I don't exactly know, but I think that is one that they see that as something. I mean, if you win, you're literally a driver winning Daytona 500, maybe you win one of those or something. So it's not something they just want up on a billboard. But I can't speak for the brand as their rhyme or reason, but they do kind of give us a selection of timepieces to choose
Okay.
from. So for me, if I'm looking at our market and I can choose something that's very classic or something that's a little more edgy, I'll probably go with the little more edgy piece that's gonna get people's attention. And unfortunately, sometimes those watches are very hard to get allocation of. So
Yes.
so it can be a bit of an issue when someone says, "Wait, I see that on the billboard, but you don't have it." Well, that's
But I think anybody who is into Rolex understands that some of these timepieces, if you're not Roger Federer, you're not getting the first crack at it.
Yeah, there's that. And I also think part of the thrill of being human is wanting something you can't have or can't immediately have. If we can all immediately have everything, then it's kind of, the thrill of the chase is gone. And I'm not trying to say that as like a carrot out there for anyone, but I think it is kind of exciting to know that you're going to have to work and push for one of these things. And that sounds really snobby probably, but I really believe that.
It's human nature. I mean, if you were told that you're going to get the first Tesla Model 3 in Charlotte, you'd be all over it.
Yeah.
You might buy it sooner than you would otherwise.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So I think you kind of answered this. Do people get frustrated when watches like that, or even the deep sea? You mentioned the Daytona capture their imagination, and yet they can't buy one. Can you speak to that a little bit? And I know you kind of mentioned it.
I think it can certainly be frustrating, but something, and it's been a very big focus as a partner with the brand, and we're speaking of one brand, but this can be the situation with a lot of brands. With many brands, it's part of my job and our job is to find something that can satiate the client or fit the bill in the meantime, and and of course do our best to allocate one of these watches when we can. The reality is we generally on certain timepieces have many more requests than based on the scarcity of the watch. So we really we don't prioritize anyone per se, but we really look at the situation with each watch and take it as seriously as we can. If someone has a major anniversary or a major birthday, or they're giving their son a gift for college graduation, or not saying we prioritize that, but to me that's a little different than someone who just wants to add a 20th watch to their collection or something like that. But everyone's a little different too. So.
Sure. So can you take a couple minutes and just give an overview of Basel World for anybody that might not be familiar with it?
Yeah, Basel World is it's I'm going on. My mind went to another car analogy. Kind of like fine. The Detroit Auto Show of watches, but it's an incredible event that I feel bad off the top of my head not remembering exactly how many years running it's been, but it has been around for a long time, and it has evolved just like the rest of the watch industry. From little, some of the brands you see today that look like these massive, untouchable entities literally had booths there back in the day at the size of the table we're sitting at, and they were pitching their wares, if you will, to buyers that took the time to travel internationally to buy them. And at the time, I'm talking way back in the day, decades ago, if you went to Basel World and you made purchases there, if they could, they would ship them back to you, but a lot of times you were literally picking the exact piece you were getting and traveling with it. And this is a long time ago. That transition to... That's
so cool, though.
Yeah, that was more like the exploratory, like you wouldn't even know what was coming unless you physically got your hands on it. Flash forward to today, Basel World is a massive luxury affair, and it's in a bit of a transition right now, an evolution right now. It is where all brands, or most brands, there's a few other shows, but it's where a lot of major brands come to show off their upcoming timepieces, and also to kind of express their brand culture, because it's as much about branding as it is the timepieces as well. And I keep talking about watches, but there's very much a jewelry presence there too.
Oh, I did not realize that.
Oh yeah, it's for me personally, one of the bigger jewelry shows I frequently go to as well. A lot of loose, precious colored gemstones, as well as.
Does a lot of that originate in Switzerland, then, or is it just because of the
does?
clientele?
But it's in general for this. It's kind of because it's a mashup of clientele that does carry both. So it's a lot of major international jewelers and watch retailers that go there. So,
very interesting. Yeah, I know my Instagram lights up not just with your pictures from Basel World, but from all the other watch brands that I follow.
Basel's interesting though. I won't go too far into it, but when my father, he's been going a long time, and he used to physically go over there. He would have to take photos of things and bring back physical catalogs for clients to tell them what's coming out that's new. Now today, we kind of know what's coming based on watch blogs like Hodinkee and other branded blogs before Basel even occurs. So
it's almost like the Apple Watch.
Yeah,
that
sort of necessity to go over there and physically show up and then have your clients in mind and kind of bring back the information to them has changed to, you go over there and it's a lot of FaceTime with the brands, and obviously we do projections and buying and that type of thing, but it's definitely different than it was in terms of the client side, because a lot of times the clients know what's coming before Basel even hits these days, and just based on blog and information. So
it's almost like CES, but you can't imagine two industries that are more different.
Yeah.
How big of a pop do you get in sales after Basel World?
It kind of depends. It does focus people on timepieces in general and jewelry, so there's a bit of like instantaneous, oh man, let's go look at what's new. At the same time, you have to imagine that most of these brands have to take time to produce these watches after they show them, and they are basing some of their production on demand at the show. So it's not like you have Basel and then 2 weeks later the watches show up. I mean, most of these brands, we've received a few models, but most of them will be a midsummer to fall delivery for some of the pieces, and some not till late 2019, 2020. So
okay, but you do see a pop in interest.
I would say so.
I know that's how I
certainly a pop in interest. Yeah.
I called you after the ceramic Daytona, and our mutual friend Eric said, "Oh, I've got a buddy who can get you," and I said, "Not this watch, but I'll talk to him anyways."
Well, but yeah, definitely a pop in terms of attention, and that if it doesn't lead to the sale of one of the Basel timepieces, maybe it leads to a sale of something current.
Well, that's what happened with me, if I recall correctly.
That's exactly.
I bought the Tudor Black Bay Bronze from you, which was a Basel watch, and it was actually hard to find for a while, even a much cheaper timepiece than the Daytona. How many times have you been to Basel World?
I have been. I actually don't know exactly the count at this point, but probably 10 or 11 times. Wow. I would say, at least. I went quite a few times when I was much younger, just kind of as an accomplice, with my father, just kind of taking it all in, and then
you had to think your dad was the coolest guy in the world.
Oh yeah,
like, I'm going to Switzerland with Dad.
Well, it's wild because he literally, he's been over there before I even went with him. He'd been over there probably 20 times, if not more. So he's been over there a lot of times. But we now go. We are generally in Switzerland multiple times a year, because a lot of brands do kind of their own little weekend or week-long things over there from time to time. So we end up there a few times a year. So.
Do you have to be a watch dealer to go?
You do not. Okay. You do not. They have they do have public passes, and I always recommend people check it out at least once. But you definitely, we're there for a week, if not longer. Definitely, as someone who's just experiencing it, 1 or 2 days is probably plenty, because by the time you you can see a lot, but you can't necessarily go into every meeting and sit down and get hands-on with everything.
Okay.
That's Basel in its current state. Definitely by next year or 2 years from now, it's kind of transitioning to a little different style of show. So it might be a little bit more public and media focused. So we have yet to see. So
what brands have been doing the best job of building hype during this event? Because I see some things that the same companies over and over again making just huge impact, and then I see other brands that I expect to do something and I just don't notice them. Is there something to that, or?
Basel World, there are quite a few other shows. There's also SIHH and a few other shows, and some brands don't even attend any shows anymore. They do kind of their own branded shows, if you will. Their own little excursions and cultural building weekends and that type of thing. So if you focus on Basel World, you might not see some brands, because literally they might not have a presence there. Certain companies. Are
there many? Because SIHH is for a particular group of brands.
It's essentially for the Richemont group, which is, to go back, Panerai and IWC, but there are a lot of non-Richemont brands there as well. But that is the focus, is that Richemont group.
Do they not do much at Basel World as a result?
They generally don't. Sometimes they will have kind of an off-site get-together or something like that, because they know those folks are going to be in town anyway. And SIHH is in Geneva, whereas Basel World is literally in Basel, obviously Switzerland. So there's a bit of distance between the two. However, for this coming year, they are different times of the year, I should say. SIHH, at least for the past few years, has been in January.
Okay.
Whereas Basel's been March or April, so different temperature, different time.
Mm-hmm.
They are now combining, essentially becoming back-to-back shows.
Interesting.
So now people will be over there to see both sets of groups of brands, if you will. So didn't exactly answer your question, but it kind of opened up a whole nother, you know, there's a lot of brands that aren't necessarily even at Basel, but
okay.
But to your question, you know, it does a lot come down to how they market ahead of time, but also the blogs and what the blogs focus on. Where the consumer's so driven by certain informational blogs and people now, influencers on Instagram and the type of thing,
mm-hmm.
that it really comes down to what they're focusing on top of the brands. But I will say that Patek and Rolex, not to just put those two on a pedestal, but really everyone's kind of waiting to see what they do year after year after year, and everything else is something that comes to your personal taste.
Interesting. So speaking of Rolex, I want to talk a little bit about Tudor. I've bought 2 Tudors from you, and I've been fascinated seeing that brand really rise from the ashes in North
it's been
America.
An amazing brand.
Can you give some background for the listeners on what happened in the past 5 years with Tudor, or maybe even 10, and your perspective on why they've done such a great job, or maybe you don't think they have done a great job?
I think they've done an awesome. I'm wearing one today, actually. No, I love Tudor. Sometimes people give me a hard time because I'm like a walking Tudor billboard, so I'm a big Tudor supporter. But they were very present in the U.S. for years and years and years. Very strong in the 90s. They had a fun chronograph called the Tudor Tiger that a lot of people focused on.
Was the Tudor Submariner back in the 90s as well?
They've had Tudor Submariners for years and decades, 60s, 70s, 80s.
Okay.
Different transitional pieces and things over the years. And then that has kind of 90s into the 2000s, Tudor kind of backed out of the U.S. and I personally don't even really know. I don't know if it was a slowdown in the brand or if they just made some.
Were they owned? But they were owned by Rolex at that
so
point.
they're both part of an organization that was founded by Hans Wilsdorf, who's the founder of Rolex, Hans Wilsdorf Foundation, and they're a vertically integrated company, but they are, essentially, a partnership with Rolex. So a lot of tech that you'll see in Rolex or a lot of development will also be applied to Tudor, but they are very much their own vertically integrated company. And I'm not just saying that to be PC or not have the Rolex.
Well, I know they make their own movements,
but
lately.
So they're doing in-house movements, which once again, it's not like, we take a Rolex, we're not taking the 3235 and putting it in a Tudor. They are literally making a Tudor in-house movement, and that is researched by Tudor and developed by Tudor, has its own corporate structure, but they are, a partnership, if you will. So, but Tudor came back into the U.S. in, I believe it was 2013, which ironically was when we launched our Charlotte location. So we jumped on board with them, thankfully, and it's been a fun ride because we kind of launched a new venture for our company in Charlotte, as well as Tudor was relaunching itself and rebranding itself within North America, and the world. So
was there a lot of interest in 2013 in Tudor? Because I wasn't hearing about Tudor back then. My friend Dave Carr, who you've sold a couple watches to as well, I remember him talking to me about it, but it was a long time before I ever bought one.
So there was definitely a lot of interest when it relaunched, and they had a lot of energy from the get-go. And then I would say they hadn't quite kicked in a strong marketing push until maybe 2015. This is me just coming from the hip here, but big push with Basel and launching in 2013. Had some good momentum, kind of slowed up a little bit, and then they really hit their stride a year or two later, and they've just been pushing very strong, and they've had to me at least, a very strong growth trajectory within our country and our continent at least. I can't speak for the whole world, but I think it's been cool, and it's not to be compared to any other brand, but they offer a very strong package for the value.
Well, let me ask you, not to put you on the spot here. I certainly understand you as a dealer may not be able to answer this. Is Tudor the best place for someone to start when buying a luxury watch? I know there's not one answer, but are they one of those brands that you should think about as your first
I think
watch?
It totally depends on A, the price point, but B, the person. if you're looking, if you know, it depends if your budget's $450. You know, Tudor is not for you because they're going to start, at least for some of the more popular pieces, they're going to be in the mid 2000s to 3000 range, if not more. So it kind of depends on the price point, but if you're comparing them to a lot of other brands that are considered luxury brands, but kind of the entry point into luxury brands, I think they are a strong place to start because you're getting a lot of heritage. I mean, these watches were literally, purchased by different militaries and navies around the world for their submersible uses, at least heritage-wise. You're getting a lot of durability, you're getting a lot of reliability, you're getting a lot of watch, once again, for the money.
Well, I feel like they push the envelope with new designs in a way that maybe they aren't as ready to do with Rolex, and that's just purely an outside
No, you're right.
perspective,
They will do a little edgier, vintage-inspired, but still futuristic, edgier things with Tudor than they will with Rolex. Rolex is a little more classical and a little, a little more straightforward, maybe. I mean, there was a watch, the Tudor P01 was announced at Basel this year, which everyone expected it to be one thing, and it was something else.
Oh, wow.
When they saw spy photos, they thought it was one thing, more traditional Submariner, and it was very not that. Very much not that. So it's an interesting one, but to me, I love it. And but it was super polarizing. But I love that about Tudor because if you're not,
you can't do that with Rolex. You can do that.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. Polarization creates emphasis and energy, and it's not always a good thing. But I think it's good to have something that pushes it a little bit, pushes the envelope, and not just another set of watches that everyone's going to love.
Sure. Well, I'd like to go back to another car analogy, just because we've done so many of them. I've tried to explain it to friends as Porsche has the 911, and it's the grandfather of them all. They've created other brands within Porsche, so you've got the Cayenne and the Cayman, but they're never going to be as nice as the 911. Is that an accurate analogy to make here?
Do you mean nice
Rolex
in terms of in terms of like how they produce it, or nice is in terms of like the feeling behind it?
The feeling, like I feel like you're never going to see a Cayman that's faster than a 911. It's never going to have a spec.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Like even I know the new Cayman GT4 is coming out supposedly, and even still, it's stronger than the last GT4, but then the new 992 is coming out, which is new variation of 911, which is going to be pretty interesting in terms of power performance. I mean, I think that's probably a good analogy with Tudor and Rolex.
And I guess in the Rolex, or when I look at my Rolexes that I've owned versus my Tudors, just hearing the click on the bezel as it turns, you can tell that it's better engineered on a Rolex. There's no question to me. There's more clicks. There's the engineering is there. I can tell in the crystal. Like
I would say, it kind of comes down to probably what a lot of car guys feel, and that is if you jump into a very expensive, obviously 911 every day, you might not have the same, maybe driving something like the Macan or something a little more subdued, but still has a lot of use, as a way to have that lifestyle, but not feel like you're showy or something like that. And I think that's a little what Tudor is going for in terms of they give a lot, you get a lot of watch, but you're not necessarily like you could. I use this a lot as a sales, not a sales pitch, but in my presentations. But you could walk in, you could sit down in first class or any class, but you could sit down on a plane wearing a Tudor, and you could sit down next to a guy wearing a $200,000 Patek Philippe, and I truly believe that both people will be equally as interested in each other's watches.
That's interesting. That is,
versus like if you wear, I don't want to make an analogy with Rolex, but people innately are
very well built watch, but it becomes almost humdrum because so many people have them. But then you realize the reason so many people have them is they're beautiful.
It's a great watch.
They're relatively affordable.
And the sub is what I relate to the 911 a lot, along with the Daytona. It's kind of similar but different with every generation, and it keeps to its roots and its heritage, and it's wonderful when everyone loves it. But it's a little different every time they develop it and evolve it. So it's cool, but.
And I will own another Submariner during my lifetime, even though you don't get the same looks that you do wearing a Deep Sea or some of the other watches.
But I think Tudor garners a lot of respect from the watch community in terms of, you get a cool watch that you can have a lot of fun with that you don't have to spend a lot of money on compared to some other brands. And some other brands, it's like the fun factor is how much you can spend on it.
Sure.
You know.
No, I think that point is probably. I have a good friend who I used to work with at Level, and he's a watch guy. And when I bought the Tudor Pepsi GMT from you, he was so frustrated with me, and he's like, he's French, and he's like, they just released the Rolex. Why not get the real thing? And I'm like, because I can buy 5 of these and experiment with them for the price of 1 of the Rolex. And yes, the Rolex is a better timepiece in my mind.
Yeah.
But
well, I mean, better is just in the eye of the beholder.
Sure.
I mean, that's not to say Rolex isn't better, but it's.
But I might rather have 5 Tudors that I experiment with.
Yeah, or also not walk down the street and people know exactly what you're. Even though I don't know, it's everyone's different. At the end of the day, that's how I see it. It's just up to your personal taste. But.
I agree. And again, I'm going to shift gears a little bit before we come back to really nerding out on watches. But how seasonal is your business?
I would say most jewelry stores, if you look at them as conservative classic jewelry stores, are quite seasonal. However, that's changing because people are very event oriented, and there's seems to be something all the time now. But we're certainly seasonal to a degree. I mean,
It's largely that Christmas time then? Is that the big?
Yeah, for most classical jewelry stores, a big part of, not a large portion, but a big part of your year, more than a single month, is generally made in December. We are a little bit different.
You're probably bi-seasonal, I would guess, because you probably also have a period when people are buying engagement rings.
Right, yeah. So, and kind of to your point about Basel earlier, we have a period when watches get really hot, and I mean, they're hot all the time right now, just given the economy, but there's always something hitting for us, which is because we've diversified our business a good bit, as opposed to a store that's just bridal focused or just fashion jewelry focused or even just watch focused. So we have a little bit of everything, which keeps it diverse, which is good. But I will say, I mean, summer definitely slows down. We battle, people are, if they're not around, they're on vacation for 2 or 3 weeks. And obviously we're not gonna, generally speaking, not gonna be selling them something when they're halfway across the world.
Generally speaking,
texting can do wonders these days. But I will say we're in a world where traditional brick and mortar, which is what we are to a degree, is evolving, and there is we try to do a lot of events year round. So even in a slow time, we'll do something really fun and fascinating for our clients.
I want to talk about the events because they're quite an experience, having gone to a couple at this point. But before I do. When we talk about seasonal, this is just pure curiosity on my part. Obviously, Charlotte, big banking town. Bonuses are around February, if I understand correctly. Do you see a big bump around February time?
Yes, but also sometimes people kind of know what they're gonna get. So they've kind of baked it in, and maybe they've already pulled the trigger, or maybe they wait a little. So. We certainly do, but it's not just Charlotte. I mean, we see it in both our locations, and I think it kind of kicks in for a lot of people. But it's not probably as big as you would think. It's not like we get hordes of people suddenly when February kicks in and they're just coming to spend money. It's still more a lot of the things they're looking for. The timing for when it lands has to be right too. So it's kind of I mean, it certainly helps. I'm not saying they aren't spending their bonuses with us, but. It does kind of depend.
Interesting. So I know you mentioned when you moved here, one of the things was that Charlotte didn't have a premier watch shop, but I think now there are a couple of other watch shops, one right around the corner from you that carry some fantastic brands. We won't say anybody by name, but does Charlotte punch above its weight in terms of top shelf watch shops now, or is it about where it should be, or is it still down
I would say that we have a lot of major brands here in Charlotte. I think the city could probably support another. I mean, I almost feel, without putting the cart before the horse, or that might be saying that wrong, but I almost feel that we could open a second location in the region around Charlotte.
Interesting. Would that be down in the Valentine, or would that be up in
potentially,
the north?
Or maybe even north? I mean, it's hard to say. My point being, Charlotte is dynamic and big enough, and has a diverse enough market that I think I look at Atlanta. I know a few other jewelers there, one of which has 2 locations. One kind of where we are, in terms of a little outside the city and one a little closer to the city.
It makes sense. There's plenty of car dealership luxury brands that have multiple shops in Charlotte.
So I could see Charlotte supporting another major entity of both watch and jewelry. But at the same time, we're not a Manhattan, we're not a San Francisco in terms of, you're not going to see major branded boutiques popping up everywhere, you know, of all these different brands. I think they are going to be a little more compartmentalized to retailers, just because, you know, if you think about Charlotte, at least so far, there's only so many shopping districts that people don't go uptown to shop, at least not at this point. They really only go to a few.
Where you are, South Park is probably the biggest.
Pretty much it at this point, except for, you know, some more areas are popping up, but they're a little more eclectic as opposed to luxury. So
okay, very interesting. So I want to get back to events now, because you create a lot of great events. Unfortunately, I feel like half of them I'm not even in town. When you have them.
They're always at interesting times and.
But I've really enjoyed going to your events. Can you speak to how these fit into your overall strategy?
Yeah, a lot of it comes down to a little bit of seasonality, to go back to that.
So counterbalancing down periods.
Yeah, so if it's a time that is not a natural bridal period, we might do a bridal weekend to try to enhance that portion of the business, and vice versa. Sometimes we'll do a bridal weekend right in the middle of a high time for that, just to once again push it up. But we try to do kind of a quarterly major watch event. We have a long going event called Watch and Scotch that we usually partner with a brand, bring a brand in, and you know, have a fun time.
I did that last.
Yeah.
Was it last summer?
I would say yeah.
Yeah, that was a great time.
Yeah, it's a good time, and that. You know, we've had a lot of, sometimes it'll just be very generic, kind of like, come have some fun, you know, whiskey on us and play with watches. Other times,
you let me put a Patek on one of them.
Yeah, you can put a Patek on anytime. But other times it's more of a experience focus. Like one time we did one with Tag Heuer, and we had a 3D driving course set up and some cool stuff. So, you know, it just kind of depends on what we're doing. But we have a big event called Watchtoberfest every October.
Oh wow!
That is essential. I mean, you can imagine it's Oktoberfest, but involving watches. We do a beer stein holding contest, and we've done some fun stuff. So,
speaking of which, should we open these beers?
Sure.
If we're talking Oktoberfest. I'm going to use a really high-tech opening device here.
It's
fancy.
Let's see how this works.
My teeth will be the next choice.
Nice. But, you know, going back to something we talked about earlier, it's all about the experience. And I think, you know, yes, people will, cheers, people will walk in and purchase something at their own will, but I think they're much more likely to want to partner and have a relationship with the store if you offer them something unique as an experience. And we try to do that as often as we can, whether it's a jewelry experience or, I mean, to get to that point, actually, a lot of young guys, frankly, I mean, how often were you in a jewelry store when you were young? You know, I mean,
only when I bought my wife's engagement ring.
Right, and that's probably 90% of guys, you know. So to bring them into that realm, you really have to do something exciting and unique to introduce them. Otherwise, crossing the threshold into a jewelry store is kind of an intimidating thing unless you are literally preparing yourself to get engaged. So that's where the watches have led to growth in our jewelry, because it brings in clients that otherwise might not step into a jewelry store. So yeah,
I could definitely see that. Do you do the same events every year, or does this just kind of constantly evolve for you?
So they definitely evolve. I mean, we have, like I said, some long-running events that we have quarterly and annually and that type of thing, but we definitely change them up and try to keep them different each time. And then we'll definitely introduce some new things. I mean, we do off-site events as well with different partners and different restaurants and different things, just to mix it up. And sometimes instead of a big just generic in-store event, we might do more of a fun watchmaking dinner where people get to take apart movements or things like that.
Oh, wow.
Do some more it might be a smaller group, but they get to do a really unique, unforgettable experience, and that really.
And I may be using the wrong term, but do you have a watchmaker on staff, somebody who can?
Perfect term. So yeah, we actually do. Our second floor is essentially an entire, about half of it is a Rolex service center. It is now a Rolex authorized service center. We could not say that for a good while, but we have that plaque now, and we have an on-site service center specific to that brand. but he has the ability to work on some other, do not just a lot of places, if you took a battery operated watch, they can switch out a battery, no problem, but they can't change the gaskets, they can't pressure test the watch to say, yeah, you can jump in the ocean with it, we can do all of that.
Okay.
So it's very cool.
That's great. That's one of the things about owning a more expensive luxury watch is they last longer, but they still need care and feeding.
They need,
they don't just last 120 years on their own.
Well, I like to, without sounding morbid, I like to think a mechanical watch is so cool because if we have, an apocalyptic scenario in our world and we're all like,
the roaches and the Rolexes.
And it will literally be like Twinkies, cockroaches, and mechanical timepieces that are still ticking. So, I think that's really cool. And even then, obviously, they would need someone who can tinker on them and service them. But the fact that they keep accuracy to the second without any, batteries is something that's really neat about mechanical timepieces.
Absolutely. I want to get into movements when we get back to geeking out a little bit.
Sure.
But, I want to ask you, how does Windsor go about growing? Are there things other than opening a new store that would lead to huge growth for you, or do you think about 5 to 6, 4, 5, 6% growth normally?
Yeah,
and that may not be the number, but maybe it's just steady state growth.
Yeah, I think it's tough as brick and mortar to think about. I mean, it's not getting any easier for brick and mortar, period, to just say, okay, let's open another location and that'll lead to growth. So if we were ever going to do that, it would be very strategic and it would be in a market that doesn't have a platform like we have with multi-brand and everything. So that might or might not happen. We'll see. But in terms of growth, I mean, we really it kind of goes back to your question about new clientele and versus developing older existing clientele. We try to push our marketing and bring in new brands and items that are going to excite people and bring in new people, and that naturally leads to growth for us.
Okay.
If someone has bought an engagement ring from us, we try to build that client into a Windsor client outside of a bridal at that point, because they're not gonna, in theory, they're not gonna be buying another engagement ring. So
for at least 7 years.
Yeah, exactly. So that's done, and that's a great way that they've we've earned their trust and their commitment to us. But what are we gonna do to get the next item on them?
Sure. No, that's great. How long do you keep your employees on average? Because it seems like I've been coming for a couple of years now, and I see the same people over and over again.
That's probably good.
Yeah.
I mean, we've had some employees, especially in Winston-Salem, for a long time. I mean, some over 20 years now. And at the same time, we have. I think it's always good to keep things fresh and have some new energy, because.
Absolutely.
Not that anyone's complacent, but when you bring someone in who's really energetic and fun and pushing things a little differently, it can bring everyone else up if they've gotten a little comfortable or that type of thing. But
new ideas are a good thing.
Yeah.
No matter how well you're running.
Yeah. But our business is very much built on relationships, and it's hard for someone to have a relationship if they're coming in and there's someone different waiting on them every single time.
Sure.
That doesn't mean someone won't be busy and someone new has to wait on them, but if they come in after their wonderful experience and that person's no longer there, I mean, we're a pretty conservative industry at the end of the day, so it tends to be a relationship based thing where people are there a pretty good while.
Okay.
So, yeah,
that's great. What along those lines, what type of training do you provide for your people? Because a lot of times keeping people re-skilled and giving them new responsibilities is a way to keep them motivated and loyal.
Yeah, I definitely think, some people are happy kind of doing the same thing day after day, but most people want to improve themselves and build on their responsibilities and that type of thing. So that is definitely a way to instill loyalty. In terms of training, frankly, it kind of comes down to what people specialize in. Like we might have someone who's a phenomenal diamond salesperson who's our go-to, if everyone's free and we have a bridal inquiry, we're going to refer it to that person because they're going to knock it out of the park every time, and hopefully we learn something from them. And on the flip side of things, we might have some really technical watch folks who aren't as strong in fashion jewelry because they're nerding out on watches all the time. So So there's a you have to find the way to train everyone up to be excited about different things, not just the one thing they're excited about. And we do benefit from a lot of brand training.
Okay.
So we, a lot of our staff, once they're there a certain amount of time, they get to go to some pretty extensive, pretty fun, cool places.
I was going to say, these probably aren't in some little bum Jiba town. These are probably cool places.
Yeah, I mean, there are some more generic regional trainings some of them go to, but we have an associate who's we have 2 associates going to a Rolex training here soon that's out of the area, let's say. We have one who's going to Schaffhausen, Switzerland for a week with IWC in May, or later this month. As literally a week-long training, but also they get, I don't want to use the phrase drink the Kool-Aid, but they get inundated with the brand culture to the degree that, that's what they bring back to the client. And that goes back into building that experience.
Well, I think that's really interesting, because I was recently in London for a weekend and spent some time with a couple friends at a wine bar. And I was fascinated because we would ask our server, what do you think about this one versus this one? And their training was so specialized. They had 5 or 6 different servers who knew different regions of France, and they would bring them out, and they would...
Specific to which region you're asking about.
Specific to the region that you're asking, they had tasted those wines, and I think they would advocate for a particular brand or a particular varietal, not varietal, they're not varietal, but for a particular
I get you.
Venue. But because they were so specialized, it was a really cool experience to us. And they knew things like, oh yeah, that's an 87, that's going to have too much sediment, so you're only going to get 75% of it before we throw it out, and that type of thing. But I think getting that training is not only motivating for those folks, but I think it makes for a better customer experience. Now, do your salespeople, will they refer, oh wait, this is he knows more about diver watches, or she knows more about Rolexes, and refer you over? Or
in a perfect world, yes. They are salespeople, so we work on what's called the turnover all the time, which is kind of what I was getting at. Like, you don't want someone who's not good with diamonds stubbornly trying to sell a diamond when someone else is super passionate about diamonds and can easily get to the bottom of it. And so the more healthy thing for the business would be for the turnover to occur to the diamond specialist.
I've been in sales.
And then they split the sale at the end of the day. Sometimes our associates are, I've had situations, I would like to say we're a perfect store, but I've had situations where people are already coming to me about whether or not it's going to be a split sale.
Okay.
And the sale hasn't even occurred. They haven't even, the client isn't even finished, and they're already worried, and so my mantra is always, why don't we make the sale occur? And then
I would word that a little
worried
differently. Why don't we make the sale occur? Pretty fucking please.
Yeah, exactly. And then we'll get to the nitty gritty about the split. But fortunately, our associates aren't so money driven and money hungry that they're in general they're pretty good. There's always situations in every business.
They're human. I mean, it's just human nature for sure.
But I think. Back to what we were just discussing, passion is so important. And if someone goes, you might kind of like your regional wine, situation. You might clearly see that someone is more savvy and more interested in one region, and they're very passionate about that. Doesn't mean that's the right one for you, but it's nice to have that experience of someone who's actually passionate and experienced with something versus just pitching you on something for no reason. And I think that's an important factor with a lot of things.
Absolutely. I brought David Watkins, who was on the podcast recently, to one of your events, and David's a knowledgeable dude. I mean, he really understands clothing and men's fashion, and he was just fascinated hearing you talk. He's like, I don't know what the fuck he's talking about with these watches. But
Neither do I.
But he's like, he knows so much. I just want to keep hearing him talking about it.
Yeah.
I think people appreciate that, and when they see it in other people, that hey, this person's passionate and they're really into it for sure. And again, I think that applies to any industry.
Yeah, agreed.
How often do you change manufacturers? I know we've talked a little bit about some specific changes you've made, but generally speaking.
Just like our staff and our employees and our family, I mean, at Windsor, we want to have long-standing relationships. We're not going to just buy a brand or buy into a brand seasonally or something like that. I mean, we look to know mean, there's some of our brands. I hope that if I have kids and they're in the business and we still have the business and everything's going according to plan, I hope they're working with these brands and their kids. Some of those you hope are very much a generational thing. Others, we do go to a lot of different jewelry shows and watch shows, so sometimes we're buying one-off things as a unique piece for certain clients. So we might work with a brand momentarily, but we're not stocking their entire collection.
Wow, I didn't
We're not talking of the
Sure.
the Rolexes of the world, but I'm talking more like maybe a jewelry brand or something like that.
Okay.
So it does depend. In general, we look for long-standing relationships, and we're gonna hope to do that. There are times where you have to make a change. I mean, you might look at the business model and say, we're spending more on advertising with this brand every quarter than we are seeing, in sales, and that just makes no sense. So, then
would you say you look at that once a year, once a quarter, or is it something that it becomes so obvious that
I would say
bring
when
it up?
something like that comes up, it's more of like a glaringly obvious thing.
Okay.
But as much as I would like to say we're analytically reviewing everything, we are a family-owned business, so we're not like the most savvy when it comes to analyzing every aspect of our business, but you kind of get a sense of when something is not clicking to the degree of what you're pushing. So we have to make some changes on the chessboard from time to time, but in general we try to vet things to the degree that we know it's going to be a right fit for our company.
And so the next couple questions, I think you've already talked to them, but maybe make it a little bit more explicit. What's the difference between working with a watch manufacturer and a jewelry manufacturer? And do you get much cross-selling between the two? I know you said that you often will lead with bridal and then transition them into watches or other jewelry.
Yeah, I mean, in a perfect world, there's something for everyone, and a lot of times people are shopping as a couple. So you might have the man who's looking for a watch and lady who's interested in jewelry, or it might be the reverse. Not to sound sexist, it might be
we recently bought a watch for Chrissy.
Exactly. Yeah. So it might be a female watch, and you end up with a men's bracelet, whatever it is, or two watches, two pieces of jewelry. But there's definitely some cross selling. Definitely different working with both, and I think the jewelry industry is a little bit more conservative in general in terms of not everyone is seeking. Men only have so many accessories. So in our market, we have some men's jewelry, for example, and it becomes a little bit more of a push item in terms of, you might not be a bracelet wearing guy, and most guys in our area aren't versus other parts of the country. Whereas we have a lot of ladies jewelry options. But watches kind of speak to everyone, at least in today's current exact situation, so it's a little easier. But
do you think, and this is just my impression, and maybe it's because I'm a watch guy, but it feels like the watches focus a lot more on the brand.
Well, that's the majority of it. Watches, you're choosing, as much as you're choosing the item that you love and you find interesting for the technical reasons and the look, you're also branding yourself, and you're whether it's subconscious or conscious, you are pulling yourself into the lifestyle associated with that brand. Whereas jewelry, a lot of times, though it can be very branded, and we have lots of jewelry brands, wonderful brands, but a lot of times it is more about that specific piece. And I'm not saying watches aren't, but a lot of guys are buying it. They're like, I'm just not an Omega guy, or I'm not a this. Versus, you don't hear that as much with jewelry. It's more about the piece and the look and the specifications.
Very interesting.
That's probably the biggest difference.
Is there one brand that you work with on either side of the house that stands out and impresses you more than the others? And I may be putting you on the spot because you're selling for these brands.
We have a lot of amazing brands. I truly believe, and I'm not just saying this because we're one of the retailers, but I do think that Patek Philippe is a very special brand, and I think that it's a brand that kind of stands apart from everything else in terms of not just the quality of their timepieces, but the meaning behind their timepieces. Except for the one-off cases, generally a Patek Philippe is a very generational item. It is bought for a retirement. It is bought as a major moment in life gift. It is bought with the idea that it's going to be a family heirloom and part of your family culture. Versus a luxury item.
And they've been very thoughtful about building that branding, because
they have, and that is literally how they market their company. And they have, I mean, I think De Beers with their "A Diamond Is Forever," I believe that campaign was the voted the #1 advertising campaign or slogan of the 20th century.
Wow.
And I'm not saying Patek Philippe's, you don't merely own a Patek Philippe, or you don't actually own a Patek Philippe, you merely look after it for the next generation. I'm not saying that's going to be that slogan for this 100 years, but it is a very powerful campaign. And outside of marketing, I really, having known the folks, running the company and met them personally, and you just don't get that sense of a major corporate entity that's just looking for profit. I mean, every business looks for a profit, but they're doing it in a way that is for the right reasons. And I do believe that. And so that brand is very special to me in that regard. But there are a lot of other, amazing brands out there. I mean, I'm crazy about some of them, but Patek, I'd say, would be my shining star, if you will.
Is there one brand you don't carry that impresses you?
There's a lot of brands we
or
don't
one,
carry.
one that stands out above the others.
Yeah. Oh man, now that is one. I wish I had given it a little more forethought. There's a brand we don't carry that also does not compete with any of our brands. That is called Baltic.
Okay.
That is a French brand, and it is not compared to some of the brands we've spoken about, not super expensive. It's $800 to $3,000. It is a really cool, I don't want to say startup, but they're doing a level of production that is above and beyond their price point by far, and they're doing it outside of the realm of the Swiss watch world, which is cool to see. Something a little different, a little diversification. And they just have a great overall brand picture. The only thing is, they're kind of a micro brand in the sense that they don't quite have a major marketing push and they've been essentially online only. So they're not quite like, you're not going to see a Baltic boutique somewhere or something like that where you can really experience it. But in terms of the quality and the production, it's been a cool brand to kind of see grow a little bit.
That is really cool.
Yeah.
And especially because you're a luxury brand.
Yeah.
You're selling luxury brands. It's cool that you can identify with.
Yeah. And it's one I would love to carry it as a retailer, but they're not necessarily a brick and mortar retailer company either, but they're kind of cool to see grow.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, enough talk on the business. Now I want to nerd out a little bit more. First off, what's on the wrist today?
What's on the wrist today? As I said earlier, I can be like a walking Tudor billboard, but I'm wearing a Tudor Black Bay 41 millimeter. It is
interesting. The two that I bought from you, are they 44 millimeter then, or what's the size on the?
You bought the bronze, which is 43, and the GMT is 41, which is this size, but it's a hair taller. So the one I'm wearing is pretty interesting because it when they launched the Black Bay around 2013, it originally came out with a red, like a burgundy bezel, and then a blue bezel, and then they launched the black bezel, which is what I'm wearing today.
Okay.
The little red triangle at the 12 o'clock, and it's a really cool throwback piece. It has kind of a gold, almost gilt, what we call gilt style dial, which is where the dial was cut out and you can see the gold relief underneath. But
that's really cool.
What's cool about this piece, to me, it has the Tudor rose on the dial, and it's the initial launch of this watch, which ran for literally less than a year.
Okay.
Then they discontinued all of the rose dials, and the new in-house movement came out with the shield on the dial and a new mechanism. So the one I'm wearing had kind of a short run, even though it doesn't look much different than the others.
Okay.
So just kind of a cool little piece, not hyper expensive or anything, just like a fun thing. So I wear it a lot.
Very cool.
Yep.
Yeah, I get a lot of mileage out of both of my Tudors. Any guidelines you'd give someone who's just looking to dip their toe into the watch world? Yeah, how should they go about getting started?
Oh man, I would say two things, and one I feel like I'm going to kick myself for saying, but read hodinky.com because there's no more immediate source of interesting things about watches. And I'm kicking myself a little bit by saying that because they're also,
they sell watches too, don't
they do, but more so that's just, it's not so much that as much as like you're still listening to someone else's opinion at the end of the day, and there's still a little bit of influence of who is advertising with said blog, but no one else comes close to having as much information and interesting things. So you can learn a lot very quickly and learn a lot about, you'll kind of cancel out some of the things, some of the mistakes people make right off the bat, if you even consider them mistakes, by reading that. And I already forgot the second thing I was going to say. So
no problem. I'm sure we'll cover it.
Yeah.
And again, I know your answer is going to be it depends, but maybe speak a little bit about thinking the first brand they should start with. And it's fine if you want to just self-promote within your own brands because you know them better, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, I could self-promote all day. I think once again, it kind of comes down to your price point. If you can buy a $20,000 watch as your first major Swiss luxury watch, or just to get away from Switzerland, Grand Seiko makes a great watch.
Sure.
In Japan, by the way, I do love them, but
I forget that you sell those.
Yeah,
they're beautiful
awesome,
watches.
They're awesome. We could bring them into this somehow. No, amazing brand, but it kind of comes down to price point and what you're looking for, because someone might be a multimillionaire who's never had a watch on their wrist, and all of a sudden they can buy the most complicated watch out there as their first watch. And I'm not suggesting that. I'm just saying it depends on the situation. Or someone might be saying, I have $250 to spend. Let's find the coolest watch that fulfills my needs in that realm.
So I'll assume a couple of things away then. Let's look at somebody who's because those are fantastic things to consider. But what if I'm a young professional who has just gotten promoted into a new role, and I've maybe bought my first custom suit. I'm driving a nicer car than I'm used to driving, and I want to establish my presence. And I say, okay, I'm going to spend between $2,500 and $7,500 on a watch. How do you start to think about that? Should they be thinking about multiple watches, or should they think about one that they really nail?
I think you said the phrase "dip your toe in." Like I would literally dip your toe in and find something fun that's inexpensive that you can get on the wrist and experience for a while. Because I know through experience that you get kind of infatuated with something, but you don't really know what love is yet, type of thing. So you might be wearing it, and all of a sudden the things you thought you loved about it are very different than what you initially fell in love with, or infatuated with.
It's funny you mentioned that. My exact path was I went out. I wasn't looking for a watch. We went to the jewelry store where we bought Chrissy's engagement ring. They had Movado there, and I was like, wow, that's really cool looking. Wow, that's way more money than I would ever spend on a watch, but I'm going to do it. And so it was probably $1,000 watch, which seemed crazy at the time. And wore it for 2 years, and just as I wore it, I started to look at other watches that were better, and then I ended up buying a Submariner as my first luxury watch. But I think I needed that 2 years with the Movado on the list.
And that's kind of what I was getting at with the reading up on it. And there's no right or wrong. That's the most important thing. Like buying the Movado and having it for 2 years was the right thing, because then it leads to something else. And so there's not like there's a wrong choice. But I would say you don't want to there's no point in buying 3 or 4 watches right off the bat when you don't even know what because you don't even really know what you like to experience or what you need on. You might realize, oh my God, I bought a watch without a date, and even though I have my phone, I'm in a meeting and I definitely need the date. You just never know. So it kind of comes down to living with them a little while.
So what was the first brand you bought?
The first watch I had, I received a very kind of what would now be small automatic Tag Heuer Formula One from my father, just as a gift for a birthday one year, and that was when I was really young. And
That's a nice gift at a young age.
It was, yeah. I mean, the nicer gift was when I graduated high school. He gifted me a Omega Seamaster 300M.
Oh, wow.
What was then the Bond watch. I mean, the one featured in GoldenEye with Pierce Brosnan. So So I wore that.
Do you still own either of those?
I still have both of them. It's kind of one of those weird things where I don't consider owning them because I didn't actually physically buy those.
Gotcha.
So like I was given those too. So I still have them. Yeah.
Okay.
Truth be told, I tried to take the Tag Heuer apart when I was
no.
younger, and so it kind of like it's a little squirrely now.
Okay.
So it doesn't really. Neither here nor there. I still have the Omega Seamaster 300M, and I wear it from time to time, not all the time, but I still have it. From time. I mean, every once in a while. I have a watch box, and it's hanging out in there right now. But that's kind of an interesting thing because I wore that watch from when I graduated high school. I wore that watch all the way through college.
Okay.
Without fail. And that was it, and it was my watch, and I didn't really even, it's not that I wasn't into watches, but I wasn't like by far was not a watch guy at the time. I mean, I just wore that watch, and that was it. And I probably could have been happy just wearing that watch indefinitely, but then I ended up kind of into the industry anyway, with that brand, and the next, now things are history, but I did buy, the first major watch I bought was an Omega Speedmaster when I worked for Omega.
Okay.
And fortunately at the time they let us purchase them through the company, so I had a pretty good price structure. It was a Speedmaster Broad Arrow.
Okay. Great watch.
Yeah, cool watch. And then it's evolved obviously since then.
Do you still own that one?
Actually, I don't. It's one of like 3 watches I have sold. So
Okay.
I sold it at one point.
Wow, you've only sold
And I
3
wish-
outside of.
I've
But
only
you sell them
sold-
for a living.
I sell them for a living, but I don't want their, if I personally purchase something, I do my best to make sure it's going to be a lifetime watch. But, like I said earlier, sometimes infatuation and love are a little misconstrued or whatever. So
How many watches do you think a person should own? Obviously a personal answer, but
totally personal answer. In fact, a close friend of mine named Anthony, he has a YouTube channel called Watch With Me.
Okay.
Just had not an article, but a whole interview about that, or he had a whole video about that basically, and it's very much a personal thing. And to his point, I think it totally just depends on the person, but I think there's a huge difference between collecting and accumulating.
That's interesting. I've never heard that before, but I can see a distinction.
Well, a lot of people, especially people with disposable income, they maybe even to make themselves feel better or something, they just buy and accumulate. And I think there's a big difference between having a passion for specific things and seeing a progression in a collection and just buying just to accumulate and have breadth of, it can still be a collection, but a lot of times you're not really thinking through why this thing speaks to you versus just buying. So
that is interesting. I feel like every watch I bought does speak to me, but they might speak to you differently at different times too.
And I use Patek as a cool way to talk about collecting, because at a certain point with Patek Philippe, they have what are called application pieces, where you literally have to send in a physical, almost like a college application to apply for the watch. And at that point, they want to see what other watches and what other Patek Philippe's you own and you have bought through authorized Patek Philippe dealers to get to that point. And that doesn't mean you should collect things just to get to that level, but they want to see a healthy, like, okay, maybe you have.
I think Ferrari does that with the
It's
F40,
very
F50,
very similar to Ferrari and a few other car manufacturers now, and they don't want to just see that you're just trying to buy every expensive, crazy, complicated, or fast car to flip them and make a profit. They want to see that, wow, this person really has a passion for it. They have this world timer, and they have this 3-hand thing, they have this perpetual calendar, and they can't police that, but they do want to know that the collector is collecting and not just accumulating or selling. So I think there's just the amount of watches totally depends on the person. Like, a collection could be 2 watches, it could be 1 watch. A collection could be 6,000 watches. I mean, it's
just size it for the right reason.
Yeah,
I guess is the takeaway there.
Yeah.
Is there a good mix of watches that you think people should own? Like for instance, hey, if you're going to build a collection, have a diver, have a driver, have whatever it might be. How do you think? Because
Yeah,
David
I
Watkins talked a lot about building a wardrobe, not just buying a suit, but in the long run, thinking about a wardrobe.
I think there's just a lot of different paths people can go down, and I think there's a lot of guys that are like, okay, I want to have a dress watch. So if I go to a black tie event twice a year, I know I put on this watch. But then if I'm at the beach, I wear this watch. But if I'm doing the sporting event, I do this watch. And, you know, so some people look at it situationally and they want to have something to fill all those needs. So I think it's more about asking yourself, what are all your situations?
Okay, that's interesting.
And then other people, you know, might I know a guy that he collects watches called the Dirty Dozen, which are all the original military watches out there. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All the original, there were 12 manufacturers basically that made almost at the time non-branded military watches, and they all look very similar, but he specifically collects those watches because he's just really into
Was this
that.
World War I or World War II? Or,
I'm gonna eat my words now. I want to say World War II, but it might have been both or over the span of
so
both.
Would Panerai have fit into that? Because I know that they were popular with the Italian army in World War II.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Okay.
These are like Vertex was one, and a few other. I mean, a lot of other brands we would know day in day out now. But I'm not a professional about the Dirty Dozen, so we'll find out if I can find a good article and send it to you about it. But my point being, some people are like, I collect dive watches or this or that, but then usually they'll have like, okay, I also have this chronograph in there, you know, so. Just totally depends on the situation once again, but I do personally believe that you know, it's fun to look at what are your lifestyle situations that you need to fulfill, and maybe find a couple different pieces for those.
So I've never done a dive in my lifetime. I've
Yeah,
probably never been below 6 feet, but I have the deep sea.
Perfect. Just in case.
Just in case.
No, but I mean, then that's the other side of collecting, is sometimes you just like things, and there's a big style element, and there's a big
well, for me, the engineering that goes into
the engineering and the heritage and the what it can do. It doesn't mean you're going to do it, but I mean, that's just because someone has a a Daytona doesn't mean they're going to go out and be a Formula One driver or something either, you know. So it's just it's all about, once again, kind of building that persona and that culture around yourself, you know.
Definitely. No, that's very good advice. So I'm going to give you a handful of kind of discrete choices, and you don't have to choose one or the other unless you want to. You feel free if there's one where you say hands down this is it, but I suspect most of these are just going to be your thoughts around how one should consider the two options.
Yeah, sure.
So
let's do it.
Gold versus steel.
No.
I think you own a lot more steel yourself, right? So you wear steel a lot more.
Yeah.
Is that accurate?
I think, you know, most people today look at gold and they say they just see dress or dressy or not casual. And I think if you looked at gold maybe in the 80s, it could be casual. So I think everything has its time and place, and we're in a very heavy steel moment right now. Steal everything.
It lasts longer for sure.
It lasts longer, but at the same time, like, you know, I don't know. So it's tough to say one or the other. I'll probably have that answer for a lot of these.
I think for most of them you will.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm wearing a steel watch right now. I have a few gold watches, but steel is probably more wearable day in, day out.
Okay.
But that also depends on the person entirely.
Okay. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Rubber versus NATO on the strap.
I tend to...
Because both are summer straps, right? Like if you're going to go jump in a pool, you'd probably prefer to have a NATO or a rubber strap.
Yeah, I would say if you're not... I mean, leather is still super popular, but if you're not wearing a bracelet... for a while, if it wasn't leather, it was definitely always rubber. NATO has become... Fabric straps have become just a major thing and player, and I will tell you, I mean, not to bring up my Tudors again, but I have a bunch of Tudors, and I have somehow naturally put all of them on fabric straps, so I probably lean NATO personally.
I think I do too. I've got two Tudors that are on that I just but I just put them on. I have the distressed leather strap that I usually use during the winter. On
but NATO for lighter.
When it's warmer out.
Yeah, rubber's cool too, but I think rubber is more situational. Like NATO, you can wear a little more maybe all over the place. Rubber tends to be very sporty.
What about bracelet versus leather? You talked a little bit about
That's
those
tough,
too.
Yeah. I think that's where it comes down to the watch. You know, like certain watches are made to be on a bracelet, and it just kind of seems crazy on anything else. But I'd probably lean bracelet. You know, I don't know. It's just tough. It totally depends. Like there might be specific dress watches are going to be perfect on leather, and that's how they're like. You can't imagine them any other way. But in general, if I was looking at a day-to-day watch, I'd probably lean bracelet.
Okay.
Durability-wise, and
What about white gold versus rose gold?
It's tough again. White gold, you have that sensation of a precious metal and the weight of a precious metal, but you essentially have the look of steel. So you have a little more subdued under the radar timepiece, whereas if something is either yellow or rose gold, you clearly are wearing a gold watch. So I think it depends on what type of persona you're trying to present to the world, and also, the watch. So if it's it's hard to say.
And I hate to ask this, well, you sell both, but vintage versus new.
They're not making any more vintage. So if you're seeking a particular model and you find the perfect example that's vintage, I say buy it all the time, because yes, it's hard to time the market in terms of price, but they're super cool. You just have to keep in mind, a lot of times they can't or are very difficult to work on, be worked on, or the parts don't exist anymore. So you need to make sure it's in good condition. So I would lean new only because most modern watches, if you look at a modern Rolex, they basically say if your body can physically do it, then your watch can do it, of any Rolex. If you look at any vintage watch, a lot of times you have to second guess yourself, like, man, can I fall in the pool by accident right now or not?
Wow.
Just because you don't even know what the gaskets are like, or this or that, or so. There's a lot more second guessing that goes on with vintage. At the same time, there's a style element that's hard to beat, and also a collectability that's hard to beat.
That's probably great advice for cars.
So that wasn't really an answer. But
but that's, I think just walking us through the thought process is helpful. So I'm going to ask you about two brands, one that you sell and one that you don't first, but that you have experience with. So, and again, to me, these seem to be the two luxury brands that a lot of people talk about in the mainstream. Even people who aren't watch people generally have heard about both of these. So Omega versus Rolex.
I'm not going to choose one over the other, though I guess I will. I would probably lean Rolex, but what I will say is Omega has some spectacular, if you think about the Speedmaster, specifically the Moon watch, or the original one with the 321 movement, the original Moon landing watch, that is, really storied watches, but I feel that Omega has become very, I used this word earlier, but compartmentalized. Certain watches are really cool and really niche and have their own world, and then some other parts of the brand have just become kind of soft, or they kind of feel like they're safe. You can kind of see which part of the world they're marketing to, whereas Rolex, I think across the board, once again, is just such an amazing brand in terms of a production house, and just, once again, still as storied as they come, but I think they have a stronger breadth of interesting pieces.
So it's interesting, this not directly related to what you said, but I've got a mentor. He's grew up in East London, and which is, back when he grew up, was the rough part of town, and done very well for himself, but he at some point he bought a Rolex Explorer. I can't remember if it's the Explorer or the Explorer 2, but he bought it, and he's not a flashy person on anything else in his life, just with his upbringing. And I was like, Jim, you've got this fancy watch. He didn't even know that it had a GMT movement. I had to show him how the GMT movement worked on it. And I'm like, what was the thinking there? And he's like, well, I was always told growing up a man should own a Rolex because he can go anywhere in the world and sell the Rolex for a ticket back home.
Yes. Yeah, that's something you hear a lot. Or you could be, whether, literally, not to bring up Hodinkee again, they had a great article a while ago, last year or 2 years ago, about basically just about that. A gentleman who I think traded his Rolex as he was a war, he was captive basically.
Oh, wow.
And then one of the things, actually, I think I'm reversing the story. I think he actually got his Rolex while he was a captive, but the value there is the sense that, you should always buy a watch because you're passionate about it. But if there's a brand that you're going to consider, I don't want to say money on the wrist, but the value is right there. I mean, Rolex is king in that
and
regard.
Globally
I mean,
recognized.
it's so globally recognized.
Appeal.
Which other, once again, Omega, you're gonna have to pick and choose between watches within the brand, whereas Rolex is gonna have that instant. It's a Rolex appeal.
That's great. Now I'm going to talk about two brands that you own, or not own, that you sell. And I think of both of them as great entry-level watches for folks. And not just entry-level, but Tag and Tudor. Yeah. How do
Tag and Tudor.
So someone comes into the store, and you steered Chrissy towards a Tag. You've never steered me towards a Tag.
Yeah.
Definitely steered me towards Tudors. But.
Yeah. I mean, I will say, regarding Chrissy, Tag has a stronger ladies presence.
Absolutely.
So I think that's probably ties into why I did that. Both are very storied.
We didn't come in wanting a Tag at all.
Yeah, for sure.
There was another much more expensive watch, and then when you showed us that one, we knew immediately that it was the one.
I recall.
Yep.
That's a tough call. I mean, the PC answer is I can't choose between the two. At the same time, I am wearing a Tudor currently, but you can only wear one watch per day. I think both brands are incredible. Both brands are very storied, and both brands have a breadth of timepieces. I will say that Tudor is probably a little more focused in terms of, their Black Bay collection and their kind of heritage-inspired pieces are very strong. But I think Tag has a stronger overarching brand picture in terms of they have a ladies' watch, they have a guy who wants the square Monaco, they've got the divers watch, they have a little bit of everything.
And like we talked about, the tourbillon and
they have tourbillon, they have some more complicated watches. So I would say Tag has a probably bigger picture scope within their brand, but sometimes they have too many pieces. Tudor is very focused on a particular type of client and type of watch, at least at the moment. They have a whole breadth of watches as well, but I think they're a little bit more, they're not even a niche brand, but they're a little bit more just streamlined in terms of who and what they're looking to sell.
I think that's great. I didn't think about a lot of those points.
Yeah. Both are great brands. I mean, you can't say enough about either of them.
Well, so we've talked about one that you sell versus one that you don't, two that you sell. Now we're going to do neither of these two I think you sell. Audemars Piguet versus Hublot. Because I think that the Royal Oak and the Big Bang series are very inspired by one another, I'll say.
If there's one, one inspired the other.
Okay.
I'll put it that way. If there's one brand that's good at duplicating other brands, it's Hublot. And as much as, you have to respect any brand that's made it and is a big luxury brand, I do personally feel that Hublot is a little, you get the sense that they're trying very hard.
Absolutely.
What would be unique within Hublot would be to see a watch that's not a limited edition, for example. That would be their true limited edition.
Sure.
Because every watch is a limited run with this thing, and which is cool, and they have some interesting pieces. But I think
what do you think of their Unico movement? That's the one that's supposedly built to be expanded over time.
Yeah, very cool. I'm not knocking it. I think any brand that does something in house and innovative is cool, but as an overarching brand, I think they are kind of like a. We kind of talked very much at the beginning about brands that look at the decade to decade and generational versus here in the now. And there's importance to being here in the now, but they're let's take the current person of the moment and saturate the market with that person and then move to the next one. So there's a little of that. AP, Audemars Piguet, I have a lot of respect for. I think it's a wonderful brand. And I like the fact that they're kind of cleaning up their distribution in the sense.
Okay.
They have some watches. I mean, the Royal Oak is the original Genta, Gerald Genta watch, which is the same designer as the Nautilus,
Okay.
with Patek Philippe and a few other watches. So the Royal Oak is just a very storied watch.
So did you watch Entourage?
A little bit, yeah.
Do you remember the scene? They're trying to get Ari to join the studio as the president of the studio. So Ari's the super agent.
Yeah.
They gave him a yellow gold Royal Oak, and it was the first time I had seen one. And once I found out what it was, I've been fascinated ever since.
That's like, I mean, strangely enough, I was watching the show Billions last night. And,
I love that show. They always show nice
timepieces. Bobby Axelrod wears AP frequently. He was wearing one on a blue camo strap in the episode I watched last night to kick off the newest season. But it's a cool brand that still, it walks the line a little bit still of like, you see a lot of celebrity flash with it, but they also have a really great heritage and classical collection that stays true to itself.
So would a counter example to that be Richard Mille, or however you pronounce it? Like, they've got the celebrities and Drake and everybody, but they may not have the heritage. Or maybe I'm
mistaken. You're that nail on the head. I mean, hit the nail on the head. It's Richard Mille, or Richard Mille is an amazing brand in terms of innovation, and I think they're awesome. I think it'd be fun to sell them. It'd be cool.
It'd be cool to wear $1.5 million watch.
And there's a lot that's cool about that. At the same time, you don't know if that $1.5 million watch is going to have significance in 10 years.
Sure.
Whereas, something like, I don't want to wrap back around the Patek Philippe, but those brands, they're so true to their roots that they're going to be significant indefinitely and generationally, and that's something. And I go back to AP. I think Audemars Piguet does stick to their roots to a degree. I think they get a little outlandish sometimes, but they still have a sense of what makes them them. Unlike Hublot.
Yeah.
I'll put it that way. I could say a lot of other things about Hublot, but I won't.
Yeah, they seem to get that reaction.
They get a lot of bad press. But,
absolutely.
But I think they kind of rock that. They're like, all right, we'll just roll with that.
Yeah.
So
that's what I've always admired about them. But I can certainly see the detractions. So can you explain the various complications that are available for folks?
There's so many complications.
Just the main ones.
But if you were to look at main, I mean, first of all, most things on a watch are technically a complication. So like even a date is a complication, if you will. So
I have my Panerai doesn't have a date.
Right.
It doesn't have. Is the auto winding considered a complication?
I guess it
doesn't have
probably could be, but
it does have a second hand.
Right. Yeah. So you have a traditional 3-hand watch, hour, minutes, and seconds. You have traditional. Past that would be some form of date, so hour, minute, seconds, date, or maybe you don't have a seconds, hour, minute, date, or hour, minute. You have certain watches that have a calendar, like a date that is around the perimeter of the dial. It still works like a date in a window, but it's just using a hand as opposed to a flip date.
I've seen those.
Then you might roll into something that's like an annual calendar, which was.
And that will show the month as well.
It will show the month, and it will keep track of the amount of days in each month, except for February. So like a leap year will throw it off.
Interesting, but it'll do April, June, September, November for 30 days. Okay.
Yeah, but
and that's an annual
February
calendar.
will throw it off. It will not. It will try to go past the 28th every year.
Okay. Does it go for 30 or 31? Do you know, or is that different by manufacturer?
It's a good question. I actually don't know what it'll go to. I just know you have to adjust it. Yeah, no, trust me. I'm not like the most technical dude. And then there's calendar and annual calendar, and there's yearly calendar. There's different little variations there too. Like some have other adjustments, but when you start getting past that, you've got perpetual calendar, which that does account for a leap year. So you're not going to have to adjust it in February.
Now, I mentioned that you let me try on a Patek at one of your events. Beautiful watch. I want to say it was retailed for about $85,000, if I'm not mistaken.
Sounds like a perpetual calendar.
Yeah, and you explained some really fascinating things to me, which as a technologist, I just find
they were probably
amazing
tricks.
But leap years are much more complicated than every 4th year, right? They didn't have rules around 100 years and then 400 years. And I believe the Patek that you showed me was good through a certain date, but then you had another.
Yeah, so certain. There's also actually, to bring up another brand, JLC, Jaeger LeCoultre, however you want to say it. Some of them physically come with a separate disc, and the idea would be at the turn of the century, a watchmaker can install that disc in the watch, and that movement kit, if you will then continue on with that disc, and you kind of reset it based on the disc.
Wow.
Patek so cool, works a little differently. I guess they technically would still do the same thing. But yeah, the idea would be it's going to, most perpetual calendars are going to run through the turn of the century.
Okay.
And then they will require some sort of adjustment, and I can't tell you exactly to what degree they'll need to be adjusted. Then there's super complicated things that,
I saw one that Matt Damon wore that actually he was getting an award for the Martian
celestial piece. I remember seeing the picture of that.
And it tracked the different rotations of the planets. I always said, how would you even know if that was true? That could have been total horseshit. And
the watch tells you it's true.
Yeah, exactly.
If the watch says it's true.
But to me, that's the beauty of watches, right?
Yeah.
I just picture this little Swiss guy hunched over, his workbench.
Little Geppetto guy,
yeah, exactly.
The reality is then you have also, there's minute repeaters, so things that have a physical trigger that you let go, you pull and let go, and it chimes the time, no matter where you're at. It was developed originally for someone who couldn't see, but they could hear. They could chime their watch. Now, back in the day, they were an instrument, a tool. Now they are a very hot alarm. Very expensive. That would be considered like Patek. That would be an application piece that I was talking about.
Now, what about a chronograph?
Chronograph, another example. So timing, Chronos was the god of time, graph is to measure, so it literally measures time, so it is literally a stopwatch on a watch.
But mechanical.
There can be quartz chronographs too, of course, but mechanical chronograph, they are usually an add-on to a movement. Like you'll have a movement and you add the chronograph element into it, then other chronographs are completely, the watch is built around them, so they're like a true stopwatch.
Very interesting.
There's literally thousands of other complicated. There's moon phases and other crazy stuff. So
that's great. What kind of price range do you get into to get a perpetual calendar with some different brands?
So that's where it gets really interesting, because to talk about Patek Philippe, their perpetual calendars start in the mid to high 70s, into the 80s, and they get significantly higher than that depending if they add other, I know you like a certain chronograph perpetual calendar in Patek, and it is you're adding the chronograph to the perpetual calendar, so you're kind of adding both those, and it's it gets more expensive than that. But to bring up the brand I was just talking about, JLC, Jaeger LeCoultre makes an awesome perpetual calendar. Right, it used to be they just had a price increase, but it was $19,000.
Wow,
which is a lot of watch for the money.
That's also a very small watch in terms of footprint, so it makes a good dress watch.
It's like you could wear it casually, but it's a dress thin. Not coin size, but it's the size of this bottle cap, essentially. a little wider, but not any taller. Perpetual calendar. It's just an amazing watch. And what's cool about that watch, it only has one little push piece. So
they call those mono pushers?
Yeah, it has one little pusher that adjusts everything on the watch, so it's already synced up, whereas a lot of other perpetual calendars, you have to correct the date, the week, the month, the leap. You have to do everything independently. This one, if you push one thing, everything stays synced, and you just go day after day after day, and everything flips. It's really
that's
cool.
Great.
Yeah, it's cool.
One of the most impressive things you've ever done was I texted you about my GMT. And the GMT movement is a complication where it tracks two different time zones, and I had no idea how to set it. And you actually texted me in probably less than 30 words how to control it, and I was amazed.
Must have just been a fluke.
It worked though. It worked perfectly.
That's good. I'm glad.
The interesting thing on that I think tripped me up is that I didn't realize the bezel has a 24-hour time scale as opposed to the 12.
Most people don't really realize that, and it even day after day. I play with them all the time, but you have to wrap your mind around it every time, because you're looking at 1 hour and a second hour in two different time scales.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. So back to the perpetual calendar and the price range. You mentioned 19,000, and they go kind of up from there. How many watches do you think most people buy before they're ready to go to that kind of complication and price range?
I think it was either Thierry Stern or Philippe Stern. One of the Sterns at Patek Philippe said that true collecting starts at the perpetual calendar.
Okay. I had not heard that, but
that's just, I mean, that's an opinion.
Sure.
But I do think there's something really special about that complication because it's actually been around a lot longer than some of the other complications we talked about. The annual calendar, which is, you know, a much less, it's keeping up with less, has actually been around only since 1996 when Patek patented it. The perpetual has been around since, I want to say on pocket watches for a long time, but on timepieces or wristwatches for not that long, but longer than annual. My point being, it's such a storied complication that I think there's something special about it, but doesn't mean you need to go spend money on it. It may not be the right thing for you. You know, it maybe you're more of a chronograph guy or this or that. You know, so it just kind of depends.
Okay. What's your personal Grail watch, or do you even have one?
I do have one, and it's gonna be funny. I think you like a similar watch, but my personal Grail watch is, and I don't usually use the word Grail that much. I think there's a lot of cool things out there. I really like the Patek Philippe 5270P Platinum with the salmon dial, which was announced about a year or two ago, and salmon colored dial that is. It's pretty spectacular, and
that's cool.
It's been my desktop background since it was announced, and you know, I would do bad things to own one. Okay. Put it that way.
Very cool. Yeah, no, it's funny. I have two. One that's not nearly as fancy or nice as the Patek, but it's so rare and it speaks to me. There are just certain things that speak to me, and that ceramic Daytona that you didn't want to talk about because you were worried that I was going to attack you. That's certainly one of them. And I like the other Daytonas as well, but I really like that ceramic one. But the 5270, Can you spoke a little bit to the 5270? Can you talk about the ceramic Daytona?
Yeah, I mean, you know, a lot of people see it, and a lot of people see the current Daytona, and they think it's just been around forever. But I mean, it's the Daytona is, along with the Sub and a few other watches, one of the most storied Rolexes out there, and the ceramic Daytona in stainless steel that is kind of the, I was about to say the 5711 of the Rolex collection, but that gets into a whole nother thing.
But it's kind of the pinnacle, right?
It's kind of, I mean, but it depends on the person. I think chronographs don't speak to everyone, but everyone wants that watch, and that's where it gets interesting.
Is it Paul Newman that made that happen, do you think?
So the Daytona was, Paul Newman really brought that watch into the limelight, and more recently so with the auction of the original Paul Newman Daytona, in quotes. I mean, he had a few, I believe, but this one really, it was the most expensive watch auction of all time when it hammered.
Wow.
It was crazy. And so Daytona fever really took on, but it's been a long running thing. The Daytona has always been very popular. It's always been one of the hardest pieces to have allocated from Rolex. And it has been one of those watches that they kind of consider kind of like an award piece. Like someone wouldn't walk in off the street to a Rolex dealer and their first relationship building watch with that dealer is the Daytona. It's more like a way to say thank you to that person in their eyes. But you know, that might also be the one watch that really speaks to someone. So it's like you don't want to keep them from having it. So it's neither here nor there. But
one of the first used watches that I saw at your shop was it was a Daytona with the steel. It wasn't ceramic, and it had the zenith movement.
Yes,
that's pretty popular.
And you know what's crazy? When you saw that, I mean, that watch, it was sitting in the case, if I remember correctly, and it had a white dial.
Yes,
and it was right on the cusp of Daytonas were really popular, really hard to get, but older ones were still, you know, collectors like them, but they weren't like whatever. So that watch, I think we had it priced at something like $11,000. That watch today, and this is just a few years later. I mean, it's basically a $30,000 watch. It had box papers, everything. There was such a when the recent Daytona auction with Paul Newman's original Daytona happened,
raises all boats.
All boats rose with that to such a degree. What happened with that auction, and it's not just for Daytonas, it's for a lot of watches. That auction got such headline news that watches in general, just especially vintage watches, got all of a sudden you had a whole group and whole breadth of people. It's inexplicable how many people suddenly were into watches that were never even thinking about them before because of the way that watch was looked at as an investment piece, and all of a sudden all these pieces just went crazy, and it's continuing to that.
I'm impressed. I had written down a question where I was going to ask you, do these make me look like an idiot or that I'm an obvious watch newbie, but it sounds like you endorse both of these.
Yeah, no, I think they're awesome, yeah.
What do you think most people who don't know a lot about watches would call out as their grail, or did they not even know that there's such a thing?
Man, yeah, that's a good question. I mean, the Daytona is probably one just because it gets so much attention that people like. The Nautilus 5711, 5711 1A by Patek Philippe is one. At the same time, you have to sort of be a little into the watch to kind of have that on your radar, but it's getting a lot of everyday press now, as opposed it used to be a little more of like a collector's piece, but I mean, the subs are always there. The Pepsi, the current, I shouldn't say Pepsi, but the current blue and red GMT Master 2 is in stainless steel, is getting a lot of attention. But it's
interesting.
There's a couple. Daytona is probably the king, though.
So, how has watch style changed over the past 10 years? Is it going more towards vintage with some of the brands that you're selling, or heritage, or?
I would say there's probably two things. Vintage, heritage inspired is definitely, that's very on point. I mean, a lot of brands, Tudor basically exists based on classic Submariner, Tudor Submariner looks and kind of like modern vintage.
Yep.
But lifestyle can do anything watch. Be worn in any situation watches or in steel or what are really driving, like what used to be considered professional sports models, sports pieces are really what has been the biggest, trend upward in the last, I don't know about 10 years, but 4 or 5 years. It seems to all dress watches people are still considering them, okay, I need that for dress, but they're not something you would buy for every day. So, you see a lot more,
yeah, I haven't gotten around to a dress watch. Is that a common thing, or do you think most people start with a dress watch?
Well, that's kind of my point being, like, when back in the day, well before I was even born, if you flew, you kind of got dressed up to go get on the plane. It was like a big deal. Now, if you fly, you're super cash and you're going to wear something lifestyle and whatever. And I think that's kind of what's happened with watches too. Like, people want something they can wear all the time. So I think it's kind of like that. It's like, I'll get to the dress watch when I can, or I'll get one at some point. But everyone has their sports everyday watch that's super cool. They can wear dressy if they need to, but wear it on the plane or wear it when they travel and when they're at work. And, and people are more worried about the lifestyle than the,
Yep. Do you see that trend continuing, or is there something on the
I think everything has its moments. Patek Philippe, there was just a great interview with the CEO, with Thierry Stern, and he basically said, it's all about steel right now, but we've seen this before with gold, we've seen this before with steel, and I think everything has its moment. So I think I won't be surprised if I see more and more celebrities suddenly. Everyone has steel, everyone has professional models, everyone wants to be different. So I think you'll see a trend back the other way at some point, because not everyone wants to be wearing the same style things. So.
And I think I know your answer, but maybe give folks, what are your thoughts about the gray market? Because obviously when there are difficult watches to get, that's a temptation for folks. But what do you think there?
I think you can make an analogy to cars again. I think it's kind of like if you're looking for let's say you're looking for the Porsche, the new GT3, and you have to wait for years and years and years to get it from your authorized dealer. And all of a sudden you can buy one a little bit more expensively, but with just a few thousand miles, I see the temptation there. The gray market is interesting, and it's very much in transition. The brands, a lot of this allocation only and weight and hard to getness, if you will, if that's an adjective, of a lot of these watches is by design by a lot of these brands, and in some ways to kind of cut out some of that gray market, because things are great when you have a strong economy, but things are tough otherwise. And if a brand overproduces and all of a sudden the world economy tanks, what are they going to do with all these watches? They're going to sell them somewhere. And a lot of times they sell them at a discount price as a liquidation, and those end up on the internet or end up whatever, or could be stolen watches, who knows. But for a lot of brands, I'm not saying Rolex is secretly saying we're not going to produce watches. They truly, I think most of these brands are having trouble keeping up with some of the demand on certain watches. But in other ways, they're making sure that their watches are sold the right way. So I'm not completely opposed to the gray market, because I think it's a natural evolution of A, the internet, and B, people wanting something instantaneously but not being able to always get it. So, you see a lot of reselling, but I would just always caution people to make sure you're buying the right way, because, if you will lose a branded warranty if you buy online. And also there's always the chance it's stolen. You hear about watch thefts
or
fake. I mean, that's, I don't even know why my brain didn't go there. That's probably the biggest thing. It could easily be fake or have fake components.
Sure. I saw one, I can't remember what the gray market website was, but Dave Carr, who we mentioned, and I were looking, and it was a Daytona with the ceramic bezel, but it wasn't the same
generation. So you have people that put that modern bezel on an older watch, or a duplicate, a fake modern bezel on an older watch. But the second you do that, Rolex will never touch the watch again. So even if it has the right mechanism inside, they'll never touch it. It's done. So if you have a problem with it, there's that. So you just have to be careful. And I personally think all these things are worth waiting for. If you just rush into it all, you're going to make mistakes. And I just, I'm not saying you should wait years and years to get a shiny object, but it's worth doing your due diligence and not just buying at whim. So.
I think that's great advice. So we've talked a lot about cars. You also are a car guy, correct?
Yeah, so I'm definitely, I don't know if I'm a car guy, but I like cars. I find them interesting. And, what's unfortunate about cars, or for most people at least, is, watches you can have a bunch and have in a little area and space and keep them safe and stuff. And cars have to have inspections. They have to have a lot of space and all this stuff, so you have to be really choosy and stuff. But definitely into cars. And
what's your daily driver?
My daily driver is a Porsche Macan GTS.
Okay.
So yeah.
Interesting.
That's my daily.
Now, did you used to have a BMW?
I did.
Before?
Yeah.
And you got rid of that.
Yeah.
Replaced it with the Macan. What's in your mind the difference between two obviously iconic brands?
I love both brands, and I go back and forth. In fact, I have my experience with BMW here in Charlotte. We have the premier dealer in the country here.
Is that Hendricks?
At Hendricks, yeah.
I had two M's. And they were amazing.
They're all awesome. Service is awesome. I could say someone by name, but I'm not going to do that. But they're an incredible group here. So that's the thing about cars. It's like you can't just have every car in the world. So when you want to experience them, you kind of have to let them go from time to time, unless you have literally unlimited income and space. But BMW is amazing. Porsche, I just love the fact that there's a little bit less production there, and I like the fact that even though it does feel like everyone's driving a Macan these days, it's their number one car and their number one production vehicle. In general, the company is a relatively lower production company, which I enjoy, and the snob in me is kind of like, it's nice to have something a little different.
Sure, I agree. Now, what did you drive today here?
Today I drove another Porsche, which is not my daily driver, and it's my only other car, but it is a 1996 Porsche 993 C2, so Carrera 2.
Okay. And so the 993, there were a couple changes that came out of that. Was the biggest one the air cooling and going to water to liquid cooled?
It was the last of the air cooled engines. And in fact, it was actually originally designed, it was supposed to be the generation that had water cooling. And for one reason or another, I'm not privy to the lore of Porsche, they pushed it back to the next generation, which was the 996.
996,
But
okay.
the 993 was originally supposed to get water cooling, and for better or for worse, it remained air cooled. And I now have one.
Did that factor into your decision to buy it, or did you just like the body style?
I
Not
have
that
to
the
say
body style
the
changes that
yeah,
much.
I mean, I'm not so hardcore on air cooled versus water cooled.
Mm-hmm.
Like some guys are literally like diehard air cooled to the point where they won't talk to you if you don't like air. I mean, they're just crazy about it.
I've met those types. They're also the ones who want the normally aspirated engines, even though the turbos.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm not that guy, but I will say probably for me the 993 body and just I really consider that car a true. I feel like a crazy person saying a car is a piece of art, but I really do believe that car is one of the most beautiful designs that man has created. I think the 993 is just a beautiful design.
It's definitely up there. I've always been a huge fan. Obviously, and it's more than just the design, and the design is arguably ugly, but the 959 was always one that's captured my imagination.
Spectacular.
Yeah. Are there any other cars you're thinking about, either vintage or when you're ready for a new one from the Macan?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of cars out there I love. I'm intrigued. I think I brought it up earlier. It must have been in my subconscious, but the new Cayman GT4 I'm excited about. I would love to have, to me, the Porsche 997.2, the second generation 997, specifically 20. I don't like the 2009 as much because it had transitional steering wheel and stuff, but the 2010 to 2012 C4S or Turbo is just a spectacular car.
Those things are going up in price.
They've gone crazy, and they've become very hard to find. They were a couple of years ago. They were much more reasonable and out there, and they've just become the 997s have disappeared. So at least the second generation.
So I mentioned the 959. That's what I would call my grail car.
car.
Do you have a grail car or?
Grail car. I would love to own a 993 Turbo at some point. So similar to my car, but turbo. I mean, very different car at the end of the day, but I just think they're beautiful.
Were they twin turbo yet at that point, or was it still?
That's actually a good question. I should know. I believe so, but
so they brought the turbo back into the 911 because for a while they broke it out into the 930, right? Was that how that worked?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they brought it back into the 911, and I would say not so much. My car is not the C4S wide body, but I could, a 993 C4S would be cool, but the turbo would just be something special, I think. So
yeah, that's always really caught my eye. Obviously, the 959 was an example of of their turbo history.
Yeah.
When you think about brands and cars, you mentioned Porsche and BMW. Are there any other brands that stick out the way a Rolex or a Patek or a Panerai stick out for you in the watch world?
Oh man, that's a good question. I think once again, it's kind of like what personally speaks to you and what you feel like is your personality and your lifestyle and brand. But I want to say I want to like McLaren a lot. Like I think that's an amazing brand.
See, that's funny. That's one that doesn't appeal to me.
Yeah, but that's
to me the Aston Martin speaks to me in the way
Aston
Porsche
Martin
does.
is amazing too. I would, and same type of thing. Like now that you say that, I'm like, man, I would love to be like an Aston Martin guy, but I've never really experienced it. Or it's hard to say. I mean, to me, I'm very torn Porsche and BMW, and I think that's a lot of people. I mean, Ferrari's amazing, but I don't feel like a Ferrari guy. Like I don't think I would feel right sitting in a Ferrari. Plus, there's just a lot of cachet or panache that comes with that, But it's hard to say. Certain things just speak to you, and others don't. And I just I've always been into M cars, and more recently Porsche. So.
Yep. Great. Well, thank you so much, Ben. This has been awesome. Congratulations on all the success. Is there anything?
Thanks for the support.
Yeah, for sure. I've referred as many people as I can, and will continue to because you give great service there. Is there anything else we should talk about before we wrap this up? Did we miss anything?
No, I mean I think it's been exciting to see that something like watches and jewelry, that's so old school, is still a part of modern society. I would say, in a big way. I mean, watches are crazy right now, and I just, you know, it's nice to see that even though technology is advancing and things are getting pretty crazy out there, that we're still interested in things that we can tinker with and play. And I think that goes back to cars too. I just, you know.
I agree. I tell folks, they're always surprised because I'm kind of a gadget guy and a tech guy, and they're always surprised that I don't have an Apple Watch.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, you know what? Like, I like watches. It's the same reason I don't have a Tesla. They're fantastic cars.
Yeah.
But I'm a car guy. I want,
Yeah.
you know, I want all the things that Tesla doesn't offer. But for me, the one game-changing thing I found that has prevented me from going with the Apple Watch is I got an Aura ring, which does all the fitness features. Yeah. And so that's my compromise.
I'll put those in the store.
Yeah, there you go. You don't need an Apple Watch. We can check your heart rate variability and your resting heart rate. So, well, again, I really appreciate it. I appreciate the friendship and all the
Thank
great
you for having me.
years.
I've appreciated it as well.
All right. Cheers.
Cheers, man.